Welcome to We've Got Ward, a Doof Media podcast series where we expertly dissect and discuss Ward, Robbo's return to the world of parahumans. My name is Matt Freeman, and I am your host, and I'm joined as always by the tiny child inside of me reminding me that I won't be pushed around by other people ever again, Scott Daly.
This is the weekly podcast where Matt and I eagerly dive into Wild Bill's world of giant fucking laser guns, a truly excessive amount of dildos, and alien-based death powers as we analyze and interpret this ongoing web serial. This week, Arc 18 Radiation concludes with chapters 18.10 and 18.z, and then Arc 19 Infrared begins with chapters 19.1. First, Victoria gives a rousing speech all about Operation Human Shield, and it works. Over 5,000 people agree to Zoolander their way into a shard computer and, bang on it and stuff. Hooray. We then dive into the heads of some of the Titans, and it's not at all troubling in there. Then we cut back to Victoria, who continues throwing her gun around like it's some sort of penis metaphor. Matt, what did you think of these 3 chapters? I
think I liked them. I don't really remember.
It's been so long.
It's been so long. It's been like 2 weeks. And yeah, they were great. I mean, we get to cover an interlude, and we get to cover a first arc chapter in one episode. So it's going to be very interesting. And I think there's going to be a lot of different angles on things. But of course, as always, I think there's a lot of underlying stuff that knits together all the ideas. And there's going to be some through lines that we find.
Yeah, I'm not going to be surprised if we end up spending most of our time on the interlude chapter this week. There's a lot of stuff in there, and there's a lot of stuff that I think helps clarify what the Titans are and what's going on there, and stuff that really, for me, helped cement how I handled them in a way that I think I was treating them incorrectly before, and now I feel like I've got a handle on them.
Good point. Yeah, I think that was valuable. Mm-hmm. All right. Some quick announcements before we start.
Sure.
The Doof the Right Thing fiction writing contest remains open. We have received one submission at this point. It takes 30 minutes to write these, folks. Just write it. Send it to us.
Well, they still have, I believe, 16 days, right? It's the 17th is the final day of the contest. I shouldn't have said that without knowing for sure. I'm 90% sure that's correct.
Yeah. Well, if it's not, then everyone should go check on the website.
Yeah. So I assume, like our art contest, everyone's just going to wait till the very last day to submit those, which is fine. I would do the same thing if I was submitting to this contest. But I mean, it's great. If you're a writer out there and you want to practice writing and maybe get some money for it, participate in this contest. We love doing these contests, and the one submission we did get, I already read, and I liked it. So spoilers, I guess.
Currently, that one's winning.
Yeah, I'm not voting in the contest, so I can be as biased as I want. And my favorite submission is the one that we've gotten. So
all right. So there's another announcement. Scott, do you want to cover this one?
Yeah, so we just wanted to, and we're going to beat this drum basically every week until March, because our friends over at Deep Impact are preparing to finish up that book. They have 2 months to go, almost to the day, before they're done with Pact, and they are celebrating that by doing a 24-hour live stream event. It's going to be a charity live stream that they're doing. I totally forgot the name of the charity, but we're going to link to they put together a whole video explaining what that is going to be, so we're going to link to that in our show notes, and that's going to stay in our show notes until March 6th, which is the day of the 24-hour live stream. It's going to be ridiculous. It's going to be a lot of fun. Matt and I will be joining them. I am desperately trying to finish Pact before that date. I'm so ridiculously behind, but I read a whole arc over the last 2 days, so that's more than I've done in a long time. But it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be for charity, and we hope you guys will join them and us for that. And we're going to be really pushing that the next few months. Yeah.
My understanding is that they are planning to do a ritual or something. So,
they're going to summon some. Oh, great. That's not great.
So look forward to that. That's going to be good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'd be like one, just imagining death on live stream and what you and I would do sitting there. We're like, guys,
Yeah. Yeah.
Elliot,
It's going to be awesome. All right, Scott, let's get into these chapters.
let's do it.
We begin with 18.10, which is the last chapter proper of Radiation before the interlude, of course. Our team, extremely battle-worn and weary, awaits the Warden's approval of Plan Storm the Gates of Hell. Kinsey has made cool new costume-modifying projectors for everybody, which makes their costumes look just a little bit more awesome.
Yeah, I a lot to talk about in this opening. We kind of open up on a hurry up and wait moment, right? Like, as hours have gone by, Rain is about to go into the dream, and our team is, as Victoria puts it in the opening line of the chapter, impatient because it's been leading towards this moment, but now they're just in this like lull before everything happens. And I really like the focus on the costumes here because, as you said, Kinsey has brought out these costume enhancement devices that just make all their costumes look cooler. But on top of that, we also see Victoria has, in this lull time, gone to work on her damaged costume because Shortcut was nice enough to point out to her that her costume needed some repairing. Thanks, Shortcut. That was very kind of you. And so she spends some of this time working on her costume. And the interesting part about that to me is she's kind of filed off some of the rough, broken edges. She's taken an animal grooming brush to clear the dust off, which has some implications. But the most fascinating visual to me is where when she's attempting to straighten one of the tines on her shoulder armor, she accidentally snaps it off. And of course, we have to remember that the tines were textually to Victoria like a metaphor for the many limitedness of the wretch, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe that's some ominous foreshadowing of what's to come when one of those limbs gets snapped off
and removed, broken off. Yeah, I like that a lot. That's really cool. You know, I think it's something we've talked about a bit before, but one thing I really like about Parahumans, and I think Ward in particular, is this idea that Wildbow takes all of the tropes of a genre, in this case, costumes, being a standard trope of superheroes, and really kind of puts a spotlight on it, explores what does it mean, what does it matter to have costumes? It's not just a set dressing, right? It's a way of saying things about the character, where they are, where their head is at, what's happened in the story. And yeah, so we've got these damaged, torn up costumes that they are brushing down and then putting a projector over to basically hide the damage.
Yeah.
And I think that's meant to sort of convey this idea that they're putting a brave face forward. But maybe underneath that brave face, everybody's a little bit the worse for wear.
Yeah, and one of the things that we see that Kinsey's tech does is kind of like accentuate the lighter parts of the costume, right? Like Victoria's glows gold a little bit. I think Capricorn's glows whatever color which brother happens to be at the time. It's accentuating the lighter parts, which also kind of has an added effect of maybe making the shadows a bit more shadowy. Which is interesting. And I think that we'll see that motif repeat again in chapter 19.1, where Victoria needs night vision, and the night vision Kinsey gives her maybe is part and parcel of the technology that she used here, because it like accentuates the bright parts, but also makes the dark parts darker.
Mm-hmm. I like that a lot because it reminded me of sort of the superhero, either comic book or film, really, tendency to have really exaggerated, hyper real colors. Whichever medium you're talking about, you never really see the colors of superhero fiction in real life. And here they're literally saying, they have these projectors that are making it so that like light behaves unrealistically on her costume, for example.
Yeah, I love how it's not even like her costume's glowing. It's like sunlight is hitting it. That's the effect that's been made here. Sunlight from an out of sight source was falling on it, which is a very specific image that is not like, just like when you think of glow, you think of like the source of the glow being the piece on the costume itself, but that's not quite what is happening here. It's really, I like it a lot.
Yeah, me too.
We also introduced the fact here that Kinsey has like casually, almost incidentally made a device that is preserved between the Capricorn swaps, which is a huge deal. And Tristan's like, holy shit. And Kinsey's like, yeah.
Yeah. That was a good laugh from me when when she like walks away in the middle of him talking to her, and he's like, we'll talk about it later.
Yeah, I mean, that's like a huge deal. Like something's preserved. He sticks something to the armor and it's preserved between swaps. That's game changing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, I enjoyed the part where Kenzie said she made one for herself, but it requires a backpack. And my brain is just like, what does that mean? Like everyone else is just a tiny little pin that they put like the either magnet onto their costume or clip on or something like that. But hers is like, no, I need a backpack. And I'm like, what? What is it like for a battery?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting how in the background of this chapter, this arc rather, Kinsey has been like feverishly working on something in the workshop.
Sure.
And I don't think we really know what it is, because I don't think it was just these projector things, because these are like cool, but I don't like, they're not like combat necessary.
Sure.
Maybe they do something else that we don't realize. So maybe this is what she was building and they just have some other function that we don't know about. But like, I feel like she must have been working on something big and important that we're just not privy to yet.
Yeah, and I think that would be very on brand for Kenzie, where like she just wouldn't tell you that. Like, and it's not even lying. It's just like we've talked about so much, like a lie of omission, where she just doesn't mention that. But I mean, it does say that that she's tinkered at this point in the story. It's like I've tinkered just about everything I can at this point, which is that's a lot. There's a lot there possibly.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah. So Kinsey has quote unquote accidentally made one for Swansong as well, which prompts Victoria to think that she wants to give Kinsey a hug, but she can't.
Yeah, which is really heartbreaking. I mentioned this on my live read when I read this part, though, that the effect this had on me was like an in-story reminder of the fact that Swansong's death was like a week ago. Like, because for us, the reader, it's been months and months, right? But for these characters, it's been literally a week, maybe like a week and a day at this point. And I think it just serves as a reminder that Swansong has not been out of these people's lives for that long. They are still actively mourning her. They are still actively missing her. And like this thing of I was rushing to make something and I just counted this person as part of the team without really thinking about it is absolutely something that I could find believable and devastating.
Yeah, it becomes much sadder, right? And I'm glad you mentioned that it was that recently, because I almost just kind of felt like Kinsey was not lying, because I don't think she lies that way, but maybe exaggerating, kind of bending the truth when she said she forgot. Like maybe she just sentimentally wanted to make one for Swansong, but now that you remind me that it was so recent, I'm like, oh, I can totally believe that she was just in the zone and she made one for all of her teammates and then realized, oh, this person's dead.
I can 100% believe that. I also was there with you though, where I was like, was this an accident? Like, I think to me, there's a potential that she just made it for Damsel, and she was kind of using I accidentally made one for Swansong as a smoke screen.
Yeah, possible.
Very possible, but I can see it as a possibility of just like in the middle of busy tinkering, just forgot that person isn't there anymore. I think when I've been lucky enough to not lose a lot of people close to me, but I definitely have had moments where like grandparents have passed away, and then you just have moments where you like forget that you just forgot. It's so recent, it's so new, you just forget. And so I think that's a very believable thing that could happen.
Yeah, I agree, and it's also super sad when that happens.
Sure, yeah.
So she also gives one of these little pins to Natalie, and she explains swiping right makes you blur, and swiping left permanently blinds everybody around you. So cool.
Don't accidentally do that. There's a Tinder joke in there. I love that she makes one for Natalie though, right? Like there's been this back and forth question, at least in the mind of our protagonist, whether or not Natalie was a member of this team, or rather not a question, just something she sometimes says, yes, absolutely, Natalie is a member of this team. And then sometimes she doesn't include her in that list at all. But I think this to me shows that Kenzie absolutely considers her as part of the team and is going to make her something. And the casual nature of this horribly consequential tool is really, really funny. And I took that idea and I thought about, well, this is kind of what's happening now, right? Like this idea of we have these capes that are so used to these stakes, so used to life and death, so used to like having this immense power in their hands that if they don't use it correctly or they make a mistake with it, people could die. And now they've just given that power to a non-cape. And that's kind of what they're doing in general inviting these humans into this battle, and we're giving them stakes, giving them agency in this ongoing fight. They're bringing them into that world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, Victoria's already multiple times said, and this is finally the day that Natalie joined Breakthrough. But I feel like at this point now that I feel like the humans are going to play such a pivotal role in saving the world this time around. Hopefully, that it would be rather short-sighted of her to deny that humans can be important.
Yeah. So. And the clip here is an owl, which I liked as well, because we were talking last week about what Natalie's role in the group was, and the wise one, the wise owl, is a fitting role, I think, or at least to me reflects a level of respect coming from Kenzie, that she thinks owl, like there's specific connotations there, and I like that.
An owl provides perspective on things.
Indeed.
Sure, I like it. So they get the preliminary go-ahead from the wardens to broadcast their message, and they go outside for a better backdrop because this is the kind of thing that they think about. And then Victoria gives her address to the citizens of Gimel.
I love the detail here that what you point out there is that Victoria is so aware that she's just like, no, we shouldn't do it in here. Like, we should do it out there. We'll see how we're living just as rough as they are. They'll see the people in the background. They'll see the tents and the fire. And it's just like, she's very aware of optics. And you can call that a Carolism. I think that's absolutely where she got it. But it remains true that Victoria is able to play this particular part of the Cape game, if you want to call it that, pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think like her interest in kind of doing the PR for this was cool and very, I mean, just realistic and just good writing, since it's continuous with what we understand of their characters throughout the story. So.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think Victoria's speech also is great. It's well written. It's moving where it needs to be. And it's just a great character moment, I think. I love the notes describing how she pauses strategically to strike certain notes, details like that.
Yeah, I think she nails the speech, and I agree with you. The writing here is just fantastic. It's one of those naturally tense moments where you're extremely nervous for the person whose head you're in. Like you almost like live vicariously through them in this moment, and are like, oh my God, this is such a big deal. Don't screw this up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's funny because, like, at this point, I was still not sure about this whole plan of hers. Like, I think when we talked about it a couple weeks ago, I was like, is this a good plan? I don't know about this. But even if I wasn't on board for the plan, I wanted her to succeed here. And you're kind of swept up in the moment. I think the writing really nails the momentousness of this speech. And I think you're absolutely right that the way it does that is through this kind of structure of big chunk of dialogue intersected by Victoria giving a note to herself. Pause here, pause for emphasis, make sure you're standing up straight, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And it does that. It repeats that throughout. I think there are 4 big chunks of dialogue throughout the speech, and each one is cut with this internal narrative coaching to herself.
Can I just zoom out and say, like, what a good sign of good storytelling it is that we really can't say at this point whether her plan is a good one or a bad one. Like, because you're exactly right that we're nervous the whole time. Like, oh, this could be a great hero moment, or this could be just the worst idea ever, and it could be a total disaster, and she would feel horrible and guilty about it. And we don't really know, because Walbo, he doesn't really fall into easy, predictable patterns of like, it's always going to be awesome, the heroes are going to win, and also it's not just always going to be a shit show. Like the heroes do get wins, and they're kind of easy to forget about because the heroes have to fight hard to get their wins.
Sure.
But I just think it's cool because I feel like a lot of movies these days, you just kind of, you're never really worried. You're like, no, they're going to win. I know what kind of movie I'm watching, but I don't really know what kind of story I'm reading.
Sure.
Fundamentally, like we won't know until it's over, and that's good. And that's good storytelling. Well,
and I think the reason it works is because Wildbow almost kind of nests the stakes a little bit. Because like there's the broad global stakes of is this plan going to work? Is this the way they win? And there's a lot of consequences for that. But then you can shrink it down to the personal, like intimate stakes here are, is Victoria going to be disappointed or surprised by the capacity of humanity, right? Like there's this idea, like Victoria has been going back and forth about her opinion on humanity through a lot of this book. And this is a moment where she's really rolling the dice on people. And you're like, is she going to be disappointed, or is she going to see them and start to see people for what they can be? And you don't know. And that adds to the tension of the scene, right? Because especially not the speech itself, but Wildbow brilliantly like allows the after effects, the slow trickle of people to play out for a long time. There's a pretty sizable chunk of this chapter devoted to the slow trickle of people responding and walking into the portals as the number of them swell. And that's because that's the stakes. It's not like, yes, we're going to get to this idea of, is this plan going to work? Are they going to succeed? Are they going to win? And how is that going to happen? But in the intimate right now moment, was Victoria right about people, or is this going to be the last straw that makes her write off humanity as a whole?
Yeah, I agree 100%. That scene is written very cinematically, like the way that he literally stretches out the time as Victoria's looking around. Yeah. More and more people are coming in. Yeah, cool.
I wanted to talk about, so we got to talk about the 5,000 pounds of gun, because there's a lot. The number 5,000 repeats a lot in this chapter. Well, a couple times, but it relates back to some other stuff. So we have this moment where Jester, she's saying goodbye to Jester, and Jester's like, "Take your 5,000 pounds of gun, you ridiculous person," which is just it's wonderful. I love that. But then we learn, as people start to trickle in, that it's going to be about 5,000 people, right? About 5,000 people are going to show up. And so we have this repetition of that number 5,000. And I don't want to get too dark here, but like both of these things that are about 5,000 pounds or individuals are tools for Victoria to accomplish her objectives.
They're being equated or compared in some way, perhaps. Yeah. Sure. I mean, and it is, I mean, for me, I don't think that you're making something up, because it's been established that the gun weighs like 12,000 pounds. It's not 5,000 pounds. So the mention of 5,000 pounds here is I mean, obviously Jester probably just doesn't know how much it weighs, but the fact that the number parallels to the 5,000 later just kind of like tickles the brain, right?
Yeah. There are no accidents, even if it was just coincidental.
Yeah.
That's my motto.
Yeah, I like that.
I think one thing we have to say, though, is the 5,000 humans here. I think it was Dawn in the Doof community that pointed this out, that was about the number of capes that were there in Gold Morning in the final battle. And so there's parallel there. We have 5,000 capes standing against Scion. Here we have 5,000 humans volunteering to fight. And just the parallels and the ways in which those people are voluntold or volunteer, and cape and non-cape. And it's just like a great contrast between these moments that are coming up on the climax of each of these stories.
Yeah. Just to talk about Jester for just a second.
Sure.
The idea that he is a human, but he picked a code name. We've talked about this before. We talked about it back when it happened. I don't remember exactly when that happened. I don't remember if it was in the first arc.
In the story. I think it might have been.
Yeah, it might have been. But that idea is, I feel like that was foreshadowing for all the stuff that's happening now. That now all of these people are coming onto the stage, the big powers fighting superheroics stage, and they don't have superpowers. But I mean, why don't they get their own code names, right? If they're gonna be fighting toe to toe with these alien monstrosities, they all deserve a superhero name. And so I feel like the idea that Jester was taking his code name back then was kind of foreshadowing.
Yeah, I like that read a lot, and it makes me think about that moment and how Victoria kind of was resistant to allow to call him by that, like, and she played it off, I think, fairly as, that's a stupid code name. It's stupid, which fair, but I think there is something to that idea that, like, no, it's the capes, it's the heroes that get cape names, and you're just a human. But in this moment now, as these people come in, the one thing that Victoria does say as she's looking out among these 5,000 people that have volunteered to sacrifice their life for this cause, what she says is, "You're heroes." She says it to herself, but she's looking at all these people and recognizing the heroism in choosing to be here and choosing to come here. And I love that the text shows that there's people of all different stripes, right? There's people that are overly confident. There's people wearing cape shirts and stuff, so like the capes are cool crowd. There's people that look terrified but are still there. I mean, it's like every different type of human being is part of this 5,000. And I think it's great. And I love Victoria's reaction to it. I love her recognizing the heroism in these humans that have no power, but were asked to help out. We're included in a way in which humanity has so often not been included in these things, and stepped up.
Yeah,
and
totally.
The moment where she says, ask Kenzie to get photos of every one of them because she doesn't want any of these people forgotten. I was beautiful. That was beautiful. I loved it.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, like you said, they all gather in this vast cauldron mega building. There's about 5,000 people. As we talked about, they spend some time dramatizing it. Wildbow kind of draws it out, lets it be quite a moment, a big chunk of the chapter.
Yeah, it's so good. I love it so much.
Yeah.
I guess what I want to kind of talk to you as we go is why these people are here, right? And I think that's a fascinating thing to explore, because what is about what Victoria said that made these people come here? And I think it goes back to one of those things that we've been talking about from the beginning, is communication. And like, this is what she started on that hard-boiled show that went so terribly for her, which was trying to include humanity in what's going on. And I think one of the brilliant things about the speech is that she opens just being fully upfront about what's happening. Look, you've seen the video. This person, we're calling this a second trigger. This is what's happening. This is why these things are here. We have not defeated them yet. They're not really holding anything back as far as what they know about the situation. Mm-hmm. And I think humanity responds to that in a way that makes sense to me. It's like, that's at least some of these people, that's the thing that they've been asking for so much throughout this whole process. Include us, bring us in on this, give us the information, let us know what's going on. Stop doing these shady, behind our backs, like, dealing. We need to have a part in this. We need to have a say in this.
Yeah, I think part of the problem for people like Gary has always been feeling powerless, and perhaps even feeling infantilized to a degree. Like all this stuff is happening to me, and I never have a say in it. And even if things go horribly, at least in this case, it went horribly, and you had a chance to affect the outcome in some way.
Yeah, I agree.
So you don't feel powerless, even if it's still bad. Mm-hmm. That which matters. I think that matters to people.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Cool. So yeah, as Victoria's group starts to file through the portals into the cracks in reality, Kinsey tells her that Scotty is attacking one of the other groups. Victoria responds by preparing to shoot some important red crystal shit with her super laser. And then, already dark, the skies seemed to darken the shade. I felt a shift in air pressure, like it was all a bit harder to fly in, or I was being pushed down. Which I just quote because I don't know if your reading experience was the same, but like, I immediately interpreted that as being, oh shit, Scotty has just teleported right on top of her and is going to kill her, because that was Victoria's intent. But I love that none of it had to be said that way, right? Like Victoria wasn't like, I'm going to try to lure her. It was just an action she took very quickly, and then it had this cool effect where like we get all of the writing cues that there is now a giant thing behind her without actually saying that. Of course, the next thing that happens is we get confirmation, but you know before you get the confirmation. And I love that.
It allows the moment to fold out in the most tense way possible, because the confirmation comes a fraction of a second after this shift in air pressure. And I know it doesn't say it, but like, I just feel like there's like an audible pop there as mass enters a space that didn't have it in there before. And it doesn't say that in the text, but that's just in my head. I just imagine that. And it's just like, it's just so wonderful. I really liked this immediate, I like that Scotty has this immediate response. Like, it's like, oh shit, it's on. This is Victoria taunted, and here we go.
Yeah. Right. And speaking of which, Victoria and Naphtha are able to fight Scotty off, but it seems like one of Scotty's main targets is Victoria, or Victoria's gun, more precisely. Basically, Victoria's laser is the biggest threat in the multiverse.
Hell yeah, it is. It's awesome. Yeah, and I mean, like, this whole fight is just awesome. It's just really cool. I mean, she's basically MMO tanking a Titan at this point, and it's so. I mean, we see here that like Scotty's response was so instantaneous that it almost kind of serves to quietly reinforce the plan a little bit here, right? Because like they recruit all these people, they start going down, heading towards the cracks, and the Titan that goes towards the greatest threat responds immediately and is there immediately and is fighting them, and then is kind of, and we'll see throughout 19.1 is kind of teleporting back and forth between wrecking shit amongst the humans that are trying to do this and fighting against people who are directly blowing her up with giant lasers. And so I think it kind of, without saying it, like made me a little more confident in the plan, because it's like, oh look, this is the way this thing's responding. It seems like it's worried. Yeah.
I think that we get even more confirmation of that as things move on, especially in 19.1, and it's revealed like all of the Titans are converging, basically.
Right, yeah. That's how, and even I think the end of this chapter serves to do that.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. So yeah, things are going to be rough with Scotty, and then we have Ophion and Neman coming as well. Good, and then of course, Kinsey tells them multiple Titans mobilized. Stranger Titan is closest to you.
Yeah, and that's like we were just talking about. That's confirmation that, oh shit, we've done it. We've pissed them off. They're all coming here now.
Yep, and then we move on into 18.z, where we get in the heads of those Titans.
Yeah, it's weird in there.
Yep. So first, though, it's basically, it's an interlude that rotates between three of the Titans, and each of them has manifested in different ways, and different degrees of self remain in each of them.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, and I want to kind of dissect that as we go, because the relationship between the remains of self and the shard in each of the Titans is, as you said, distinct and different. And I think the ways in which the chapter positions the point of view of the character we're in, because like the first one, we're point of view of Hunter, but which Hunter, right? Like because the last one, we're definitely in the shard, right? When we're in Titan Fortuna, we're definitely in the perspective of the shard itself, because we're seeing memory recall of prior to everything going down on Earth. And it's just really interesting that exactly whose perspective we're in informs the relationship between shard and human, and that makes up what this Titan is.
Yeah, I think if anything, it seems like Augur is the least complicated, in the sense that it's like, oh, we're getting the point of view of this whatever virtualized mote of the Augur person that is retained inside of the Titan, and actually kind of finds it horrifying that he is trapped inside the Titan, which is kind of contrast with Hunter, who doesn't really feel anything in particular about her current situation as being a fate worse than death.
Yeah, well, I think what we learn right away and throughout is the personality of the human matters towards the relationship between the two, and matters toward what the Titan is and what it's doing.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that I like had the most duh moment when reading this chapter is I was very much, and if you've been listening to the episodes, you've heard us talking about, well, which side are they on? Good team or bad team? Like, we're talking about these Titans as if they're like uniform, and they're all either good or bad. Like, we're kind of doing the same thing with Titans that Worm talked so much about doing with heroes and villains, right? Like, this taking, like, it's not just good side and bad side, it's not just heroes and villains. And we quickly learn that these Titans are just as individual as any human being in the story so far. They have things that they want, and they have goals to try to achieve those wants. And I was trying to lump them together a little bit too much and make it like more of a uniform goal. Just like these are the shards, and what they're trying to do is end the cycle, and that's all they care about. And that's not true, as we see here. Like they are unique, they are individual, and that makes things a lot more complicated and a lot more interesting.
Yeah, I think Wildbow's been rightly praised for his character writing. I mean, I think it's one of his strong suits is the idea that all the characters are distinct in a way that makes you feel like this is the full gamut of humanity. And I think that's exactly, I love what you just said there about this idea that each of the shards is an individual. In fact, they're all kind of weirdly different from each other, even more like to an even greater extreme than humans are weirdly different from each other, because we have relatively short lives and so forth. Whereas like the gas, focused shard has been the gas focused shard for potentially like millions of years. So who knows how weird she gets.
And I mean, I think what you said about Wildbow's ability to create characters and complex and interesting characters is so true. And what I was doing was I was looking at a Titan and I was saying, this is a thing with a character inside it somewhere. Mm-hmm. And the truth of the matter is the thing is a character too. And like the complicated nature of what makes up what a Titan is still, that's a character. That's a character on its own. And I wasn't doing that. I wasn't treating Scotty as a character. I was not treating Hunter or the Titan version of Hunter as a character. And it becomes very evident very quickly in this chapter that that's just wrong.
Yep. So first thing that happens in this chapter is we get background on who we eventually find out is Hunter. We start the chapter very disoriented. Speaking for myself, I initially assumed that we were in the present, following one of the refugees of the Gimel megacity. So like this was happening now to someone, not someone evacuating Bet, but someone evacuating Gimel. So we spend a bit of time getting to know Hunter, a girl whose circumstances have forced her to grow up way too fast.
Yeah, I agree with you that it's a little disorienting, and it might sound a little conceited to say that, yes, I thought it was a present day evacuation, and therefore, because I thought of that must have been an intentional kind of trickery there. But I think it maybe kind of was, because like it's this really jarring cut to people evacuating, and I think the first thing your brain is going to do is go, oh, this has got to be Gimel evacuation, especially in a chapter where we've just set up that human beings are joining the fight. So my immediate reaction to this was, okay, so we're going to maybe go through the perspective of some humans and see how they get involved in this fight. And then we're going to see them struggle in this interlude. That was what I thought at first.
I agree. I thought that was the case, and it actually takes a while. We don't learn Hunter's name. We don't get any explicit references to Bet. I think the first reference we get might even be mention of Scion attacking New York. And then you're like, oh, I get it.
Yeah.
So, I agree with you that it is an intentional little misdirect just to kind of throw you off. And it's fun. I like it.
Yeah, I like it too. Of course, in retrospect, though, when you look at the interlude as a whole, the ending, the way 18.10 ended makes this very obvious, right? Because it's like the end of the chapter is Titans are coming. All these Titans are coming here. And then we immediately cut to the Titans and show the ways in which like what they are doing and the ones that are going to eventually start heading towards our characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So can we just pause and reflect on how much her aunt and uncle suck? Because, God, they suck.
They suck so much. And I like, it's, of course, her uncle is a compliance security consultant. He's me. Except I don't have a slipped disc or whatever it was.
Bulging disc. Yes,
bulging disc. Thank you. But no, they're awful, and I love the ways in which they contrast with Hunter, who like there's this whole scene at the beginning is where they're whining to the people about like what kind of job should we do, where do we get to live, and they're just like, look, if you do farming, you get a house. You'll just get a house if you just do farming. And they're like, I don't want to do farming. And Hunter's like, I do. Look, I know how to do all these things. And it really sets up the dynamic, which is Hunter feeling like this person does not listen to, that is pushed and pulled and prodded without any input of her own. It's a really great way to contrast who this character is. And I think the book gives us this small moment of victory here when we see how we know her uncle's shitty. And then we get this moment at the whole end of the interaction where he walks back and says, "Success. They might have an administration post open. Goes to show you, you just have to know how systems like this work." And Hunter's like, "Oh, so we got a house?" And he's like, "No, no, we didn't." So they still, so like, he didn't do anything. Like,
yeah,
he's like, thinks he's
failed.
playing the system, thinks he's greasing the wheels, like, and he failed. Not success, the opposite of success.
Right. I mean, as much as I just uncomplicatedly hate the aunt and uncle characters because they're awful and they're bad. I kind of get to this idea of like being so disoriented and dislocated and terrified that they're just desperate to have something that kind of looks like something they're familiar with. And to them, the idea of having to become farmers is probably just utterly terrifying.
Sure.
And so they're just going to, even though it's really kind of objectively stupid, they're just going to try to like, they're going to pretend things are fine and that he's just going to get a job as a, he's going to get the same job, basically. He's just going to get, the world ended, but I'm not going to have to change careers. I'm going to get my same job again.
Yeah,
just
let me tell you,
in a tent for a while.
Let me tell you what job's going to be really sought after in the post-apocalypse world. Security compliance. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
I have no skills in the apocalypse, Matt.
It really is a beautiful like way of showing like humanity, human failing to cope with changing reality. It's just like I'm totally just gonna get my same job again, right?
Sure. Yeah. Well, and I think that's reflected in the way they treat Hunter as well, because as you said at the beginning, Hunter is this person that had to grow up very quickly, and they are not treating her that way. They are treating her as much of a child as their child is, and these events, what has happened to Hunter, what Hunter has witnessed, and what's going on have aged her, but she's not being treated that way. And like, as much as, yes, that's terrible, and I think her aunt and uncle suck, I get it. Like, I get looking at a kid and not fully understanding that they can handle more than you think because they've gone through some shit. Yeah,
totally. I think we can talk about Hunter's character and how she's grown now. So first, her future friend, Sam, first offends her, but then he actually listens to her, which means a huge amount to her in that moment and later. Let's talk about dildos.
All right.
Yeah. Let's talk about dildos in a way that's very clinical and sucks all the humor out of everything that Wildbow's doing here. So I think it's simultaneously funny and charming that Hunter thinks about dildos 800 times and talks about them like 4 times, because it strikes me as very true that a young teen, one who, like you've mentioned, is sort of forced to grow up too fast, would sort of fixate on like this one weird taboo and shocking idea and just run with it and mention it like kind of way too many times.
Yeah, I agree with you. I love it. It's such a great way to paint who Hunter is. And like, let's look at the first time it's used, because I think this is actually really clever what Wildbow's doing here, because she's talking about her aunt here, and she said she was so good at sounding like that, that being affronted, always stiff-backed and hypocritically critical and politely impolite. It was like she had an unwanted foot-long dildo stuck up her ass 24/7. And what I love about that is hypocritically critical and politely impolite is clever. It's just a clever, smart turn of phrase coming from this kid, and then immediately followed by the great dildo imagery, which is just kind of like childish, but rebelliously childish in a way. And I just think the two of those, like those two things combined, like this clever wordplay followed by this hilariously like crude image, I think just is just a perfect way of characterizing her as, yes, absolutely this person who has maybe grown up very quickly, but is still a kid in some ways.
Yeah, I feel like that paragraph that you just read is just a perfect example of painting a character as being complicated and complex in like 2 or 3 sentences. It's masterful. I love it.
Yeah. I just like hypocritically critical and politely impolite. It's just like, I love repetition. I think that's so clever. And I was like, oh, Hunter, you're really cool.
Yeah. I hope nothing bad happens to her.
Yeah.
Don't
worry, it won't.
Okay. So, of course, a major thing this first part of the story is doing is establishing the importance of this one small act of listening on Sam's part, creating a connection that's enough to make her feel okay about going to live in a tent.
Yeah, we meet Hunter as this angry kid that's ready to go off the handle at just about everyone around her. And then she meets Sam, and he listens to her for the first time in forever. And the book shows us the effect on her immediately. Like, she's had this great interaction. She almost cries that she's so happy. Her uncle comes back, and we see her uncle put his hand on her shoulder, guiding her forward with an impatient kind of insistence. And she bit back the urge to shrug it off or get angry. There was time for that later when Sam wasn't watching. So we see immediately this interaction, this relationship with this guy who was kind to her and listened to her for the first time in forever has immediately shifted the way she acts. She's not going to get mad at her dad. She's not going to shrug him off and her uncle, and yell at him and get angry because Sam is there. And so we immediately see this is the effect that this kid has. And of course, we're going to carry that through the rest of this part of the chapter because he's not there at later points. And
yeah, right. I think something to bring up, which may or may not have an effect on how we talk about Titan Arachne, is the fact that her problem has a lot to do with feeling like she's being pushed around and is not in control. And of course, her power is the classical type where it is completely out of her control. It does shit she doesn't want. She can't control it the way most people can control their powers, which means she's constantly trapped in the position that is the worst thing for her. Which yeah.
Shards.
So we skip to present day Titan Arachne fighting the goddess giant avatar Red Queen creation. We never really settled on a name for these, did we? But no. she's calling it the Giantess.
Yeah. I love Wildbow does another W cut here, which is that thing that we named a little while ago. We have this moment where in the past Hunter is stepping into the golden sunlight and it's a future that's so figuratively and literally bright that it brings tears to her eyes. And then we cut immediately to a faceless Arachne that doesn't even see with eyes anymore. But yet the woman she's staring at, the goddess giant, is still so bright because of all the connections to her that it is blinding Arachne. And it's just, I love these transition cuts. Like, they're just so, it's like, it's not essential, right? Like, it doesn't like change how you would read the scene, but it just, I don't know. It's just smooth and clever, and I just really like them.
Yeah, well, it makes you feel like it's connected. Sure. I mean, and it is connected, but it shows you that it's connected. Isn't she also like, she says she didn't cry before, but now she's like weeping blood from a hole in her head or something?
Yeah.
So apparently the goddess giantess has used her alignment power to just draft a bunch of Earth cheat citizens into fighting Arachne, if I'm reading that right. So Arachne fixates on how Bianca had everything while Hunter had nothing.
Yeah, and it's really like, this is one of the things we get. This is like the first time we've been in the head of a Titan for a while, and we're seeing like the way that they pull from memories, and not just her own memories, but she's looking at Goddess, looking, quote unquote, and seeing images of her entire life. What Bianca's life was like and what she had, and comparing it to herself. And I really like this chapter immediately introduces Arachne as the thing that had been Hunter, right? Like, this is something a beat that has hit over. Like, I don't think in this section it ever uses Arachne. It might, maybe. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I don't think though. I think it mostly sticks to the thing that had been Hunter. And this is a designation that is unique to this Titan in this chapter, right? We're seeing from 3 Titans' point of views in this chapter, and this one is unique to it. It's the way it's referring to it that way. And it feels like a thou dost protest too much moment where like she's pointing out that I'm no longer Hunter. I'm not Hunter anymore, but also using Hunter in your name of what you are still, right? Like it's like by pointing out that I used to be Hunter and now I'm not Hunter, you're like drawing more attention to the fact that you were and maybe still have some of Hunter in you, which of course textually we'll see confirmed by the end of the section.
Yeah. I mean, again, we'll probably do a bit of jumping around here to compare and contrast amongst these, but it does definitely seem like Augur is distinct from his shard.
Yeah.
Fortuna is definitely distinct from her shard, and she's almost like brushed to the side. But Hunter seems like Hunter is almost inseparable from the Shard. Like there doesn't really seem to be a distinction between what the Shard is doing and what Hunter is doing. It just seems to be there's this new thing now, the Hunter Shard amalgam, which sort of does things that Hunter would want to do, but also you don't think, well, like Hunter wouldn't want to just kill a bunch of people. So
I think there's actually, and I didn't pull it, but there's actually a line later in the chapter that says like the Titan, the Cape and the teen girl were all in alignment. So basically that's what's happening here, is like they're aligned in what their goals are. And I think that is a truism that is throughout this chapter, though, is that no matter what the relationship between Shard and human are, they act in alignment, kind of. It's very interesting. Like we'll see at the end with Contessa, we'll see that the Fortuna Titan like not negotiates, but like talks with the child Fortuna to be on the same page before they make their choice. And here they're all on the same page. Augur's is a little bit different, but I still think they're generally like, in his mind, he sees it as you're in control, but I'm definitely helping you. So they are a lot. It's different, but broadly the same. Yeah.
I'm also reminded that the Hunter that we met in the first part of this chapter hasn't yet had to deal with, well, I mean, we're about to see it, right? So we skip back to Hunter struggling with her out of control new power, and then Amy shows up to help her get it under control, and she gives her that tweak that starts her all on this path.
Yeah.
Which is kind of what makes like Mincemead the crazy. We don't really recognize this Hunter in the Mincemead character who we meet later on, right? Because she kind of loses a bit of herself. She's kind of halfway between Shard and person. But anyway, in this section, it's still her connection to her friend that she goes to first after feeling gratitude that she's been helped by Amy.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that in a bit, but first I want to talk about Amy, because this is one of those sections that out of context reads completely different than in context, right? Yeah. Because like out of context is like, oh, look, here's this person that walks in this room and helps this person with their problem. And you're like, that was nice. Thanks. I was so thankful.
Yeah.
But because we know the finish line of this whole thing, this whole area, this whole part of the chapter just reads as uncomfortably disgusting, and like you're just like kind of horrified as it's happening because you know what's going to happen. And it's so fascinating to me how context can completely change the tone of a scene, where if I were to just cut all this part out and just send it in a Word doc to someone, they would be like, oh, cool, someone needed help, and then someone came in and helped them.
Right.
Look at that. You're great.
Yeah. I mean, think about the horrible tragedy and irony of all of this, that Victoria did indeed help Hunter from the beginning. Like that was very early in the story. It might have even been arc 1, where she hears, I think from Sam, I didn't actually go back and look it up, but I think it was Sam who tells her that his friend is struggling, and basically, unfortunately, puts Hunter on this path that leads into Amy's clutches, and now here to being this monster. It's awful.
It was the very big. I think it was the second arc, because she runs into Sam when she's doing her hospital rounds, right?
Yes, which is after Fume Hood is shot, which is another thing that was set up at the beginning of the book.
Yeah.
And resulted in a Titan.
We're gonna have to reread this book, Matt.
Yeah, we are. We've got Ward again. Yes.
But I want to talk about the ways in which this section ends, though, because just like the W cut we talked about before, we end this section with Amy asking her what's the first thing she would do if she was cured. And she says, dance, hug my friend, and then cry, right? Those are the three things she says. And then we cut to her in Titan form dancing, and then she grabs Goddess and hugs her really tight. And I don't think she ever cries, but she's certainly like laughing maniacally throughout it all.
I think this is where she's crying blood out of the hole in her head.
Yeah, I think you might be right.
I think I said it too early last time.
But that's, again, like this just little subtle,
it's awesome.
Subtle structure thing that's going on here. What will you do when you're freed? And that's what she's doing, but a horrified version of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's more than just poetic writing. Like, I think it's showing that there's these echoes and refractions of who Hunter is manifesting and how Arachne is conducting herself.
Yeah, I agree.
So Goddess Giantess is extremely strong, but Arachne manages to grab her in a bear hug and crush her, and then she turns to fight Jaborim and Mother. She sees Chris in the distance, and she sees him as everything in herself she hated and everything outside herself she hated. So
I love that.
Got kind of a vendetta for Chris going on.
Yeah. Where do you think that comes from?
Well, I don't know. I feel like it's going to go somewhere, though. Like, I don't think... I mean, Chris feels like a character whose arc we have not completed yet.
Yeah. I mean, she says in this moment that like he was there in the room when Amy did this stuff to her. And that's where like part of the hatred comes from. But yeah, I mean, I absolutely think we are starting to lay the seeds for some focused Chris stuff, because I like, he's here, he's like fighting out against the Titans a little bit. And I think there's that moment where she recognizes a look on his face of like, or she acknowledges like, this isn't the way you wanted things to go at all. Which seems to be like starting to lay the foundation for this idea that Chris has gotten in over his head, and maybe we're going to see some change in him. Maybe finally. I still have hope for Chris. I don't know if I should, but I still do. I
mean, he's a gigantic asshole, but like, I believe him when he said his goal was like, we need to save everyone and get them off this planet. I think he's realizing that he's basically failed in his goal. So
yeah, and I mean, I want to see where he goes. I'm really interested in him. He's been this character that like has kind of like dropped out of the story and just made little tiny appearances here and there. But I really want the book to really focus on him, and I really want to see how, because I don't think we're just going to get like, oh, it's time for the Chris redemption arc. I don't think that's quite going to be how it ends up shaking out. But I am interested in him enough as a character to just be really curious where the rest of his story goes, because I agree with you, it's not over. It absolutely is not over.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if Wildbow has ever done what one would call a redemption arc. And I think the reason why I'm not immediately getting an answer in my head is that I don't think he would do one in a way where it was obvious. Like it would be realistic and complex, and no one in real life actually gets a redemption arc. And thus I wouldn't expect someone in a Parahumans to get one. But
well, and I think it's going to be important to what I think the book is trying to say about all these big, broad themes, right? Like, Chris is a person that was with everyone else working towards getting better. He abandoned that goal. He left. There's got to be consequences for that. And how those consequences shake out in his continued story are going to be part of what the book ends up concluding in its way about what it's saying about these things. So
yeah,
he's important. He's important is what I'm saying.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, he's been here since the beginning. I think it works so well how we get the parallel of her using capital D dildo and capital B birth, in the former case being Hunter, in the latter case being Arachne, describing what's coming out of the mother monster.
Yeah, when I saw it, I like got excited, like visibly excited, because it's just this really clever way of reinforcing all the stuff we've been talking about, that there is this connection from the person she was to the person she is now. And it really helps seal to me what the chapter is doing about making us understand what the Titans are. And it's just a really kind of, I guess it's kind of subtle. I mean, it kind of pulls attention to itself. Like it's such a specific way of talking that I think it immediately draws attention to itself. And Wildbow repeats it 3 times in this, and I think he does it in a clever way where we introduce it in the Hunter section with capital D dildo. And then I think there are 2 uses of it in rapid succession within an Arachne section that is just like, maybe if you missed it the first time, here, let me do it again right after that. And maybe you'll draw that line.
Yeah.
I think structurally it's very well done to kind of clue the reader in on what's going on there.
Yeah. I going back to your comment about like, she doth protest too much moment. The fact that Arachne uses these like mental, verbal tics is suggestive of like, yeah, there's definitely a lot of Hunter left in here.
Sure. And I think one of the things that we've been primed through Victoria's conversations with Tattletale is this idea that like you shouldn't try to break apart what is Hunter, what is Shard, what is Titan, whatever. Like look at them holistically. That's the refrain we've been hitting over and over again throughout the story, and I think we're doing it again here with these Titans. It is an amalgamation that it includes every bit of it, and trying to segment it out too much is not a good idea.
Yeah, good point. So we learned that Arachne just wants to be free. She doesn't want to join with the other Titans. That's not her thing.
Yeah, and she isn't interested in destroying the world and like not starting a new cycle. She doesn't even want to destroy. She doesn't even want to just blow up things. And why is that? She says because of Sam and some of the other people she still loves. And so that is, I think maybe in the Augur part it says this more textually, but this is when I realized that what these flashbacks is not just like flashback for reader's sake, right? This is actually what's happening in the chapter, that like memories are being recalled.
Yes.
To drive or help reinforce the goals of the collective unit. Like, let's remember Sam because we have to remember. And I think it says here, like playing that memory on loop over and over again to remind ourselves of, we don't want to destroy everything because there are still people in this world that we care about.
So do you think that she's just fighting now because they're attacking her? Like because she seemed pretty destructive, like with the killing all the people part.
No, I think she totally wants to kill a bunch of people. I just don't think she wants to kill all the people.
Okay.
I think she's interested in killing a whole lot of people. But
maybe she blames the Earthsea people for what happened to her or something like that.
Yeah. Well, definitely the Shin people. I think she wants to kill a whole bunch of people.
I meant Earthsea or Earth S. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. I still haven't nailed that down exactly. I guess because she doesn't want to kill everybody, but she's definitely killing a lot of people. So
yeah.
We'll see.
I do think like the most interesting part of this for me though is where this ends, right? Because we don't end on this moment of Arachne saying like, I just want to be free. I don't want to kill everyone. I'm going to be on my own. I'm resisting the pull from Goddess's mind whammy, but I'm also resisting the pull from all the other Titans reaching out and wanting to connect with me. We don't end there. We end where we cut back to Hunter. And it says, "This way," Uncle said, hand on her shoulder, pushing her forward. Right? So we cut. It's so fascinating to me that like we could have just ended there, but we cut back to presumably back in the past of just that moment of being pushed and pulled and prodded forward. And I think that's really interesting to me.
Yeah. I think that's really cool. It's one sentence, and usually it's broken by the page break symbol, gold warning symbol, and I think it's really cool. Yeah, it's just it indicates this feeling for her, right? This feeling of constantly being pushed and not really in control of herself.
Yeah, it is a way to scream out at the very end of the section that this is what motivates Hunter. This is why this has happened, because of this feeling.
This, you can almost say this is a kind of backlash against all that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, we've established Titan Arachne as a character now, not just a force. And I think that's going to I don't think that's just like, well, I both thought it would be cool if we had a Titan POV. Like we're going, I think it's going to matter that we know who Arachne is as distinct from Hunter. We know who Titan Augur is as distinct. Well, we never knew Augur in the first place, but I think it is going to matter.
Yeah.
So now we meet Augur. And he's a mercenary who's very in tune with his destructive power. We follow him blasting his way through a clandestine facility, fighting off overwhelming odds, and using his blaster power on himself to blast himself into another dimension temporarily.
Yeah, and I love Wildbow just does like really quick characterization here where we really understand who this guy is almost immediately. Like he's a guy who lives by this pretty strict rule-based system. The first words he said are 3 rules to a job. And then he goes through each one of them. And it makes sense when we learn that his power is basically like a cycling rule of 3, where it's like his blaster power cycles through 3 different things, and like 3 seems to be an important number to him generally. And it's just really like we did with Hunter, like we very quickly did with Hunter, using the dildo jokes and using her contrasting with her uncle and aunt. Here we immediately understand who Augur is by just like this emphasis on rules, on order, on preparation, on deals and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I like that, and of course, it's established that he's one of these capes who we've heard about, who's just so in tune with his power that he gets bonuses, if you will. Kind of reminds you of like Jack, where he maybe gets more leeway from his power than he would otherwise. It kind of like throws him cool new uses and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So we cut to Titan Augur. Now his power has taken on a tinker aspect, but now Augur the man is a voice in the head of the Titan. Yeah,
and this immediately reinforces what we've been talking about before, that this arrangement between Shard and human is distinctly different from the Hunter-Arachne relationship, where Arachne seemed like it was both Hunter and not Hunter, with maybe a tiny bit of fragment of like past save files of Hunter.
Yeah.
Augur seems more active and separate, right? Not in control, but influencing. And basically what we do here is we create a dynamic that is the reversal of the typical Cape Shard arrangement, right? Where the Cape is in charge, but the Shard is like pushing and influencing. And the way Augur describes this relationship is the exact opposite of that, is that the Shard is now driving. He refers to it, like he personifies it and talks to it. He talks to his power, at least in his head, and then it is aware enough to like send it memories and send like the memories we're seeing in this section are ones that Augur is picking to help provide ideas to the Shard that is in control. Like here's a way to get out of this situation. Here, have this memory. And so he's so much more active and aware of the arrangement than we saw in Arachne.
Yeah, and this makes a ton of sense because the Shard always thought it seems like the Shard thought he was a great host. He's like, the Shard's like, oh, you're great. You know how to do this stuff. We're in sync. So now that the Shard's in the driver's seat, the Shard's going to be like, well, I'm going to use my human as a resource because he always knew what he was doing before. And if anything, he probably knows better than I do how to do this battle stuff. I'm just the power.
Yeah. And the way Augur describes it is he cut a deal, right? Like at the moment of tightening, in his mind, the Shard was like, all right, buddy, here's what's going on.
Yeah.
You get to live, but I get to drive. And he's just like, yeah, okay, I'm fine with that. And it's so unique to everything we saw with Hunter's situation.
Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of the couple of moments where Dauntless's power like feels like it sighs with frustration when he refuses the full measure of the power.
Yeah.
And then later is like satisfied when he finds out that his son is alive. And basically it's just kind of communicating that his power is, I don't want to say subservient, but his power needs his go ahead to do certain things.
Yeah. Which is again unique from this. Like it's all, every one of these relationships is unique. But I like that as much as we have this, like he made a bargain, he's aware of the situation, he knows what's going on. We do see conflict in it, right? Because he says to himself, well, he had time to figure it out. He would be like this forever, maybe. And this is a tiny part of him buried deep, deep inside, express the deepest and darkest kind of terror at that notion. So like it shows like it would almost be too simplistic to just define this as Shard human, right? It's more complicated than that. There are more facets going on here than that. Yeah, absolutely.
So turns out that Axehead, not described as Scotty, not Titan Scotty, but Axehead arrives to help him fight Valkyrie. He thinks briefly that he can manage, that he can imagine having a connection with Axehead, like a human connection. But this imagining is the closest that he can get to a real connection.
Yeah, I like that you pointed out that he calls her by her cape name, and because that jumped out at me too. Like that's very significant. I think he still views these people as their cape forms, just like he does himself. Like I think it's intentional turns out that Augur does not have a Titan name still, that we know of.
Yeah, it's funny because my brain did a trick on me where I thought that Augur. I was like, oh, Augur works as like a mythical reference because it's like a foreteller, and then like only now am I like, no, it's Augur with an E, which is a drill.
Yeah.
It's nothing to do with the foretelling usage. It's just whatever. I was wrong.
But I do like what you pointed out, like their connection is he describes it as the only way he feels warmth anymore. And like basically what happens is they look at each other, or he looks at Axehead and sees every like facet and potential between them, and like says, oh, in one possible potential we were close, and I feel the warmth of that potential, and that's all I've got. That's the only bit of warmth and happiness I have left. And I think that goes maybe to me to explain the desire to connect amongst these shards, because I think what we've been doing, and again I think to my detriment, I've been doing this is once again saying like, oh, they're shards want to connect with each other, so that's just what's happening here. But it seems like Wildbow has written in a actual like in-universe reason for why these things are drawn to connect beyond just like, well, that's their shards, that's what they want to do. Like even the human beings left in there somewhere also feel this pull of connection. If the only warmth you can feel anymore is when you look and see this moment of connection between you and the other Titan standing there, well, that's how you get the human on board for this whole reach out and connect with each other thing. And I like that that's written into the story.
Yeah. I mean, once again, it's taking a human concept that we care about and wrapping it in a cool sci-fi conceit and threading it through everything perfectly. So in the past, again, he finds himself in a situation where he knows he can't win the fight, but he can create enough of a mess that his enemies can't afford to pursue him. Basically, he's, like you said, bringing up this memory to give the Titan self an idea. So back in the present, Titan Augur riffs on this idea, leaving the heroes to unsuccessfully fight off the machine army as he makes his way into the city. Yeah,
and I mean, this kind of goes into the fact that we know shards are, especially unconnected shards, are uncreative. And they're not really good at problem solving. So Augur is being nice and problem solving here. And yeah, like as we were talking about before, these flashback sequences are not just for the benefits of the reader. They are textually occurring in the book. We are seeing this memory because this memory is being fed to the point of view character we're currently in. And look, I don't want to go too Byron chocolate here, but remember when Victoria had like a random flashback at the beginning of one of her chapters that we pointed out was like, oh, that's unusual. Like that doesn't happen very often, that Victoria will flash back. And now here's a textual situation where characters are flashing back to moments of importance for reasons. I don't even know what I mean by introducing this, Matt, but it just struck me.
Yeah. If we get more like explicit Victoria flashbacks, I'll be super worried. I mean, if I'm going to invent what you mean, then it's like, well, this is some kind of dialogue between her and her shard. Maybe it was her shard poking this memory into her mind to be like, hey, you should be thinking about this right now. You should be thinking about the patrol, thinking about the humans. You should be thinking about the humans. They're a resource that you're not tapping right now.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I like that because that's a solution that is not as terribly ominous as the one that was in my head, which is like, oh, she's a fucking Titan already, man. Which I don't actually think is true, but I like that. Yeah, it is representative of communication between shard and host when we see these flashbacks. Yeah, I like that.
I think that she might be susceptible to being a Titan because, like, I think the reason why Hunter, went Titan so easily was that the door was already halfway open for her.
Sure.
And the door is not closing properly for Victoria either. So
yeah,
and this isn't a new idea. I think we've been talking for like weeks now about this idea that things look bad. Is Victoria gonna be the one that ends the world? That hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, you're right, because I think if I'm remembering correctly, the book drew specific comparisons in the door opening in the Hunter section.
Yes, I think so.
So they use similar verbiage there. So yeah, I like that.
So we jump over to Titan Fortuna. First off, we have confirmation that this shard is indeed the forward-looking eye of the lonely Abaddon. Is that how you say it? The third entity, the one that distracted Eden. We get a lot of yummy, well-written stuff as we see how the eye thinks about all this. I love the fruit on the dead tree imagery that this shard thinks in.
It's really good. And of course, what it does is immediately establish that this point of view is different, right? In Hunter section, we're kind of seeing this kind of combined Hunter Arachne thing. In Augurs, it's definitely Augur. It's much more human based, like he's talking to the shard as if it's a different part of him. But here, this is the shard point of view. We're seeing things from the perspective of the eye of the loner, from the perspective of that shard, because there's in Fortuna's section, there's no flashbacks, right? There are no specific like section breaked flashbacks like we had in the previous two. She is just kind of remembering. She's remembering the time when she, as part of Loner, bumped into the other entities and made this arrangement and linked with the child Fortuna and did all these things. So yeah, this is absolutely unique again. And I think, like we talked about before, this is showing who's maybe in more control here. That in the case of this Titan, the shard, the eye, seems to have the most amount of control. Yeah.
It's Contessa's shard has always been an exception, right? And now we have full confirmation of that a lot of the rules that govern the other shards are just not going to apply. I think now I'm gonna misquote this, and everybody's gonna correct me. But what didn't Scion say specifically that her shard was like not one of his shards, but was also not dead? I thought I remembered him saying that her shard was not dead specifically.
I don't.
Yeah, it was only like 2 years ago. So, but anyway,
I think that has to be true, right? Because that has to be true. Because
I'm not sure. And I'm not sure what the implications would be exactly. I think I was just pointing out that like we know that like her shard is a wild card and kind of always has been and continues to be here even as a Titan.
Yeah, because the dead shards were the ones made from Eden Corpse.
Yeah.
And she was already broken off by that point.
I think so. Yes. And also, I don't know.
Man, I wish we had spent like a year and a half like diving super deep into this book so we would remember these things. I think that's right, though.
Something along these lines.
Yeah.
So we find out that Fortuna is basically locked in a stalemate with the Simurgh, who keeps corrupting all the paths that she's generating. In every instance, the Simurgh's main objective seems to end up with horribly suffering but still alive humanity in some form.
Hey, silver lining.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the only definitive answer we get here is that the Simurgh and Contessa are not working together. We speculated on that a couple weeks ago. They seem to each have their own agendas, and they are in direct opposition of each other. And while neither seems particularly great for Team Humans being alive, it seems that the Simurghs might be slightly more preferable.
Oh, God. Yeah. And I mean, the ending is very ominous to me, though, because it says basically that the child, which is, Contessa, the woman, and Titan Fortuna come to an agreement that they'll take a path which basically it's a path that the Simurgh kind of approves. Mm-hmm. So the path is hold the cracks back until the right moment. The child and the Titan thought in concert. Yeah. And that's the fact that like the Simurgh was already kind of leaving at that point, which means the Simurgh was like, yep, this is what I want. Sure. So that's I think that's bad.
It is. I mean, I think it's bad all around. And I think what we'll see in the next chapter is part of step one of this path involves Fortuna sending all of her connected shard or Titan buddies to the battle, right? Because then like the ones that she's fighting with, the ones that Victoria are fighting with in the next chapter outside of Scotty at the beginning, I think are all, it says specifically they're all Contessa linked Titans, I think.
Yeah, I don't remember.
I think I'm 99% sure on that.
You're probably right.
I want to talk about the child though, because I think this is really interesting, right? Because when the Titan Fortuna is thinking about Contessa or Fortuna. It talks about her in the form of the kid that she was before all this started, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's interesting because we've talked so much about how this, like, the interaction with the shard kind of arrested Contessa's development, and she was kind of like a child. And I think it's very interesting that that's the way it sees her. The part of Fortuna that is left is seen by the other one as a child. That kid that in that moment killed Eden.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very interesting because, again, this is unique to this Titan alone. This is not an arrangement we saw in either of the other two.
Yeah. Another thing that I think is unique is it seems like this shard. I mean, this shard doesn't respect Contessa in the same way that like Augur's shard respected him, I would say.
Sure.
Because it sees her as a child. It thinks of her as a child, and it's not really consulting her for like advice. It clearly thinks that it's the one who knows what's doing and should be in charge. It's almost the exact opposite of the situation with Augur, where his shard is like, oh, this guy's awesome. I want to keep him on board. This one is like kind of almost annoyed that it has to deal with this child that it sees as being so inferior and not really worthy of its power.
And yet it still goes to her, right? Mm-hmm. Because they still come to an agreement on that. Like the child Fortuna says, I don't want to be a slave anymore. Titan Fortuna says, yeah, me neither. Totally. Same page. And they come to a group decision on the path that they're going to take, which you think if like, I don't know, maybe we're putting too much into this, but you think if that wasn't a necessary step, that Contessa would have just like, or that the Titan Fortuna would have just said, okay, here's what I'm doing. But we see this coming together of the facets of that make up this Titan in agreement on what the next step is. And that says something that even in this arrangement where I agree that the Titan or the shard or what have you is still in a much more in charge than either of the other two we've seen, there is still that negotiation and agreement happening here.
Yeah, I guess that makes it all slightly less horribly ominous, that the fact that, you know, the child Fortuna, the woman Contessa, whatever, approved of this plan, and presumably she doesn't want horrible things to happen. So
yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting because when the Titan is going through its paths to victory, it seems like, based on what we see in those, that the end goal is complete the cycle.
Yeah.
Like, but it doesn't actually ever come right out and say that. It just says, in the path where this happens, blah, blah, blah happens. In the path where this happens, blah, blah, blah. And so, like, it doesn't ever, like, explicitly say, my goal is to complete the cycle. It just says, in the steps to take to get there, here's what'll happen. Here's what I see happening with the Seamerks tampering with me. So maybe I'm just being too optimistic. Maybe I just really want Contessa to not be awful. I don't know. I don't know
either. I just assumed that she was explicitly looking for plans that were going to blow up the earth and kill everybody. But now that you mentioned that it isn't specifically written that way, I'm like, maybe that's a clever thing that we're going to realize is meaningful later on.
Or it's my like desperate optimism.
Yeah. Well, good, possible, hopeful catch.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, that's the end of arc 18. We're going to go on into arc 19, I guess.
Yeah, we're going to move from radiation to infrared.
Infrared, or infrared, as I said as a young person.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
That's like when my sister said cathedral instead of cathedral.
Yeah, definitely the first time I read the word, it was like, infrared light.
I don't blame you. Like,
yeah.
That's what it looks like.
Yeah. There's no dash in there. Anyway, 19.1. And I think we'll talk about this more toward the end, but this is a pretty unusual intro chapter. The intro chapter for the arc plunges us right back into the tactical situation. Titans converging from multiple directions, including the Stranger Titan. It's just picking up right off from the end of the last 18 chapter with Victoria. A mysterious class SS marker is on the horizon, which we'll find out later what that probably is. And Victoria is comparing the humans to hornets attacking better equipped and more durable giants.
Yeah. I agree that it's unusual in that normally we use the arc break as a way to move forward time incrementally. But this is literally just pick up right where we left off. And I think it's a really evocative way to begin the arc, because you can hear Victoria's near hopelessness in this moment that only gets worse as the battle goes on, as more Titans continually join the fray. And I think it's important to note here that this was her plan, and therefore success or failure of the plan is, at least in Victoria's head, entirely on her, right? If this plan fails, it's all her fault. And of course, if this plan succeeds, she's not going to take credit for her, because that's just who she is. But I think this is the emotional focal idea of this chapter, right? Is it has this oh fuck moment here where we're all screwed and all is lost, but no one is taking this harder than Victoria, because the reason why we're here, the reason why we're doing this, is because of the plan she came up with.
Yeah, that's true. I think, I mean, that if we're setting the table for Arc 19, then I think her feeling of responsibility for this might be a big part of Arc 19.
Yeah.
So there's a very fun sense of tempo to this battle, as the heroes repeatedly ensnare Scotty only for her to teleport her way free again. It's also fun that Victoria takes something of a central role, possessing one of the more destructive weapons on the scene. So we get some very awesome moments in this chapter where she fires a laser, then kind of just tosses it and fights Scotty hand to hand, and then catches the laser before it falls.
You know, someone pointed out when Titan Scotty first came in to being that it sounds like Scotty, like as in my name with a Y on it.
And now you keep hearing it.
And I didn't hear it at all the first time I said it, and now I can't unhear it.
Me too.
It's real bad.
I was actually thinking about just saying we should just say Skatey from now on, but
sure, it very well could be Skatey. I don't even know.
I didn't look it up, so
I just know that ska is a type of music, so just throw a DI on the end there.
That's true. Yeah. It's probably a reference to that.
Yeah, that's absolutely what it is. No, I think you're absolutely right that this is just like a lot of fun action to open that. I mean, like things get more and more dire as we go along, but it doesn't mean we can't have some fun with it. And her like throwing the gun, punch, catching the falling gun combo is really awesome.
Yeah.
And I also like that, like, not only is it awesome, it's realistic, because we have these moments where Victoria's like, ooh, the gun didn't like that, which is also part of a trend of Victoria increasingly personifying her weapon as the fight continues, to the point where she talks to it when she sets it down at the end of the chapter.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And yeah, you're right. This chapter actually has more lighthearted stuff in it than I feel like pretty much anything in the last arc did. I'm referring specifically to her interactions with Crystal.
Yeah, well, I think those moments cut through the dire hopelessness in a very intentional kind of way, where it's like, you got to juggle this, and we need to cut this tension a little bit. Yeah, we'll talk about those when we get to it. But.
Okay. So ever the thinker, Victoria tries to figure out the best way to leverage her new weapon, comparing herself to Legend and Purity, but eventually settling on Crystal as the one to imitate. Crystal typically drops in a close range to better aim her lasers, and so Victoria tries to copy that behavior.
So she notes that she's been an Alexandria Light and now calls herself like a faux Legend. Are we going to have a 3-beat where she's like a quasi-Eidolon? What would that even look like?
God, I hope so. I mean, she does have a bunch of different powers. So like leveraging multiple powers at once, you could sort of say she's already doing that. But
yeah. I mean, my brain immediately went back to the one part where Victoria like ruminates on what kind of person Eidolon was for a while. And you and I were like, we're setting up something. My brain's like immediately going like, here it is. Everyone's going to hate her because they all hated Eidolon too. I don't know if that's going to happen, but that's where my brain went.
Yeah, Eidolon kind of has been the specter in the background of the story.
Yeah.
Let's
not forget the Seamerg and her planning.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that.
Yeah, right. Because what she wants is tied with that, right? That's true. Yeah. Because she wants a new handler, right? So that could be maybe, I don't know.
I do love that she lands on Crystal's strategy here, though, which seems to marry like her general close quarters combat with the Crystal's long distance fighting. But it's so funny to me because when she lands on it, she's like, oh yeah, this was the thing that Crystal would do that would really piss off everyone in the family. So I'm going to do this.
Yeah, that's true. That's hilarious.
Yeah. Before we move on, there's a moment here that I wanted to talk to you about where Victoria is basically like, yeah, I'm like totally fine dying.
Uh-huh.
I could deal with these things if it was just my life on the line, but I owe all these people out here as well. And that's certainly noble. I just kept hearing Natalie's voice in the back of my head as I read this part where she says she's worried that people on this team would sacrifice their life even if it wasn't entirely necessary. And I feel like that's where we're headed with this, where Victoria just talks about how like, yeah, I basically become completely fine with dying myself. It's just the only thing that's keeping me here and centered is I have all these other people to worry about as well. And it feels like that's where we're headed. And I hope that there's someone here to like pull Victoria away from that when we get there.
This is the bit where she's thinking about like her life experiences have taught her like, capes always just die really young. And and I'm going to die really young. And might as well be now. Yeah.
And to emphasize this part, right after this, there's a moment where I think she's looking at Tristan and maybe Sveta. She's looking at her team on the ground fighting, and she thinks to herself, I wanted to think we were doing what Tristan had suggested, working together, putting emotion aside, being removed from things with a heavy weapon in my hands helped a bit in that regard. So, couple things here, Matt. I don't quite think that's what Tristan meant when he was offering this advice for whether or not they should go into battle. I don't think Tristan's point was, you should try to put your emotion aside before you walk out on the battlefield. I think Tristan's point was, I don't think you can do that. And if you feel like you're getting swept up in your emotions, you shouldn't go fight.
Yeah. You can't really put your emotion aside. Mm-hmm. And I think this is worth talking about because I feel like this is a classic Victoria failure mode is like a failure to appreciate the degree to which her emotions affect not just her mental state of being, but also her choices and the way she sees the world.
Yeah.
And this is just the way it is. Like if something bad happens in your life and you're super sad, like everything just looks a certain way. Like you everything looks dismal. You don't see opportunities you would have seen otherwise. You don't see the good in things. If you're angry, then the people who are across from you look like enemies. They look like opponents. They look like people who are against you, and you wouldn't see them that way if you weren't in that frame of mind. That's almost a function of emotion. It's an orienting reflex that causes us to see the world it's literally a filter. It's a filter that presents to the conscious mind like the idea that the world is actually that way. So to say you're going to set it aside, it's like you can't. It's like setting aside your eyes. Like it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and I think Tristan's entire point was you get in these situations and when you realize it, it's almost too late. Like he got into that fight in a terrible emotional state and made a split-second decision that he regretted instantly, but it was too late. And like just this idea of like what Tristan was saying is, I just got to put this emotion aside, which importantly, she's not doing, right? Like not only is I think she's interpreting what Tristan's argument was incorrectly here, I also think she's not putting her emotion aside. And I think she knows that to certain extent because the way she phrases this, I wanted to think we were doing what Tristan had suggested. Mm-hmm. So I think he's reading his intent wrong, but also kind of aware that she's not doing it, because right after this moment, we get this part where she like rants about how much she hates Scotty, like not just as an enemy, but just like as like just the way she fights. Like she hates it. And like, she really gets like swept up in her hatred of this Titan. And it's like, those are emotions.
Yeah. Right. I mean, the idea that she sees Scotty as someone like screaming at her face constantly. It's very visceral. And is the kind of thing that would cause you to make a foolish move. Mm-hmm. Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just, so I'm just like, if like Tristan was listening to her inner monologue, I think it would be like, hey, wait a minute. That's not quite what I meant there. Yeah.
I feel like you're spot on that like Tristan saying that and Victoria completely whiffing on it is a huge like indicator of where we're going in the near term with Victoria.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
So it's a minor thing, but the idea that Lung shows up here only to be useless yet again is somehow perfect.
Poor Lung.
And of course, it's totally consistent with what we know of his power. So
yeah, we get this moment of hope where like I think she gets a message from Kenzie that's like, I think Lung can can lock down Scotty. And then we see later, nope.
No. It turns out Scotty realized basically that if she doesn't fight him, then he doesn't grow, and thus just don't fight him and he won't be a threat. I mean, I guess it could have worked conceivably, but no.
Yeah.
So Wildbow introduces a very subtle ticking clock in the form of the battery indicator beeps for the laser. So the weapon will gradually run out of batteries over the course of the chapter, and then kind of be taken out of the action. So I thought that was cool how like the battery beeps give us a sense of time and progress.
Yeah, and it's actually one of two ticking clocks in this chapter because the other one is the arrival of the other Titans, but that is shrouded from us. I think that's interesting too, right? Because she's so kind of swept up in fighting that we get seen that Kenzie is sending her updates on the estimated arrival of the Titans, but we don't actually see that time. Like we don't, and I think that helps. It's a ticking clock that we can't see. So there is a ticking clock that we can see of the battery level, but there's another one that we can't see, which is when all the other Titans are going to arrive. And I think that juggling of tension there makes this more fun.
I think you're right. So Crystal showing up to support Victoria feels like such a moment of triumph to me.
Yeah.
And then Aunt Sarah arriving shortly after makes it all feel a little bit less like cleanly triumphant. But still, their ability to banter in the situation feels like a kind of emotional win.
Yeah, and I think it comes on the tail end of Victoria basically internally ranting about how much she hates Scotty. And so like she's getting really, really down. She's feeling really, really hopeless. She's angry. The hatred is flowing through here like this is some kind of Star War. But then her sister and her aunt show up and we get banter.
Yeah.
and for a brief second we forget about the oppressive doom of the battle and the stakes of everything being so high, and we just get this fun banter. And I think you're right that like Aunt Sarah's inclusion here takes it down a notch because the text really emphasizes how like clinical is not the right word, but like professional and
distant.
Like, yeah, she's engaging in the conversation, but is not engaging in the banter like a human would.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just those little indicators that she's not really 100% herself.
Right. And how each and every one of those like hits Crystal hard.
Yeah. Yeah. So the Nemean Titan Victor finally shows up and makes that makes everything just that much more complicated. He's a whole different type of problem too, which I think completely stirs up all the variables. Like the instant we feel like we might possibly have a handle on the whole Scotty situation, and Victoria kind of knows how to fight her, the Capes kind of have a system for dealing with her, and now Victor shows up and you can't engage him in close range. He has this much more defensive style. He's basically the opposite of Scotty in every way.
Yeah, yeah. And Wildbow's having some fun here because he has Victoria call him cowardly. The lion, the cowardly lion.
Cowardly lion.
But we do see that like Scotty, the Nemean Titan is going directly for the civilians. He kind of runs around the fight and attacks the civilians right away. And Victoria gets pissed, understandably, but she takes it out on Victor. She says, "Fuck you, Victor. You hurt so many people for selfish, ignorant reasons, and you became this, just doing more of the same." Which is interesting because I think a couple chapters ago, I would have been like, "Hey, whoa, Victoria, like that's not Victor in there anymore." But after 18.z, I'm like, yeah,
yeah,
like there's probably some of him in there too. Like based on what we've seen from some of the other Titans, like that seems fair to me.
Mm-hmm. We've also learned that we can kind of trust Victoria's internal verbal slips. So like the fact that she thinks of him as Victor might even suggest that there is some Victor in there.
Yeah.
Although Scribe thinks there's not. So we'll see.
Yeah. And I mean, this whole thing brings back an ongoing question about this, right? Because we've now been in the head of three Titans that definitely have pieces of the human left inside of them. We know that Fume Hood is the same way.
And Dauntless.
And Dauntless.
But we also know about Oberon. They say that there's not any.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, right? Because like it seemed at first that the normal reaction was there's nothing left of the human inside, and these were the exceptions. But then as we've added to the list of there's still some bits of humanity left inside these people, it seems like that's the norm. So I don't know what to make of this. what is Victor still in there? What is his relationship with his shard? I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. And it makes me wonder if we're going to find out, or if it's just, we're just meant to to just understand that it's complicated and it's not just a monster. It's got vestiges of Victor left in there.
Yeah. But these, and this, I did write it in the notes. So yes, Victor is a Contessa Titan, as is the Stranger, I believe we're told. And what is the other one that comes? The Ophion.
Yeah.
Is also a Contessa buddy.
Yeah.
So
just the worst.
This is when you can like assume that this was Contessa's step one, right?
Mm-hmm.
That this was as part of her, like, we don't want things to crack yet, so let's do something to temporarily stop that.
Mm-hmm.
So
true. I didn't think about that. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So even when it seems like at least they can hold the line against Nemean, Ophion shows up along with a trio of just extremely gigantic minions.
Yeah, and I love how this is structured, because every moment our heroes think they've got a handle or an edge in the fight, something else happens. Scotty's there, and then the Nemean Titan shows up, then the Ophion Titan, and I think the Stranger shows up at the exact same time. So it's just like, it just keeps building on top of each other. Every time you feel like, okay, we maybe got this. Nope. And then that's when Victoria announces this is actual hell.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great moment of just like, oh my God, how can things get any worse? And then they get worse. I love it. So the three Dallin/Pelhams have a bit of a philosophical debate as they react to the increasingly awful situation. Victoria is frustrated and feels that they've already failed in a sense by allowing any casualties at all to occur. Sarah thinks one should try to be realistic in their goals and focuses on setting and achieving such realistic goals. Victoria counters with Carol's maxim that the goal should be to deny the enemy their objective.
So I think this is a really fascinating conversation, and I find myself like just agreeing with everyone, mm-hmm. And that's a weird place to be. Like, I certainly like the nobility of Victoria saying like, death is unacceptable, and I'm not going to call anything a success that results in death, because that cheapens and takes away the responsibility I have for those deaths. But also, like, she said it herself when she was giving the speech and right after, like, people are going to die. She knows this is a fact, but it's just the way she frames responsibility and success and those kind of things.
Yeah. Yeah. I almost feel like they're talking past each other a bit too. Cause like
Sure.
you can have a goal of doing thing A while keeping the opponent from doing thing B. Like that's, it's allowed to have complex multi-part goals. But I think this is the kind of thing that happens, especially like in a family where people are more invested in like winning the argument than like having the nuanced take.
I also think you can allow yourself to feel good about preventing more death than there was, right? Mm-hmm. Like, yes, like, I don't think it removes responsibility for you to say, okay, we did a good job of stopping more people from dying. That doesn't mean like that you're being okay with the people that did die. I don't think it removes that, but in Victoria's mind, it has to. Any saying any saying of success when someone died in her mind right now is cheapening that person's sacrifice.
I feel like it's a recipe for becoming like jaded and hollowed out to never allow yourself to feel good about. Like, it reminds me of Love Lost, actually, where like she kind of got ground down by her job because she didn't really let herself feel like it was a win. She always felt like there was. Yeah, it was just terrible. Everything was terrible, and she's cleaning up people's messes and never really able to stop these bad things from happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's also what led to Glory Girl becoming increasingly more destructive and violent.
True.
So
as the Stranger encroaches, it starts driving people to suicide at the edge of the battle, and Victoria responds by firing blindly into the area where it might be. Notably, she finds that she can't even aim at certain areas. This sounds familiar. And I mean, just to say it out loud, isn't it actually kind of weird that Vicky isn't just immediately going, oh, it's blindside. Blindside's the Titan.
Yeah. I mean, maybe there's just a lot of stuff going on right now. Like, I would not be surprised if like we see Victoria in a post-fight briefing that is like, hey, I think the Stranger Titan's blindside. But maybe in the moment, like, he hasn't been around that much.
Yeah. I'm always hilariously wrong with my assumptions anyway, so it'll be interesting when it turns out to not be Blindside at all. My other thought was like, when Blindside went Titan, it just kind of went ahead and erased everyone's memory of Blindside ever existing.
That'd be really funny.
So but I think we'll find out eventually, one way or another, probably.
Yeah, this is the moment though where I think what we were talking about earlier comes back, where Victoria is having trouble seeing and asks Kenzie for night vision, and I like this moment because it's established that Aunt Sarah has better eyes than she does. And like, she's looking into the distance and seeing something and like covering her mouth in horror. And Victoria's like, what is going on? It's like, oh, capes are dying. And I think this is part of the suicide stuff that's happening, right? Like, this is the Stranger Titans effect that Aunt Sarah is seeing here. But yeah, then Kenzie gives her the night vision that specifically says the darks becoming darker, the brights becoming brighter, outlines were highlighted. And I just like, I think it's great. It's like a great double-edged sword, right? Where you can focus on the brights being brighter, but at the same time, the bad things look worse, the good things look better. I just like the duality of that.
Everything is more extreme.
Yep.
And down it's too perfect. Yeah. Her very vision is influenced so that everything looks extreme to her, which is exactly what emotions do to you.
Yeah.
That's perfect. So at least when Ophion's minions show up, it actually distracts Scotty from fighting the capes, which is nice. It's quite clearly established that probably the only thing saving the humans at this point is that the Titans are still spending a lot of their time fighting each other and not, the humans.
There we go. Contessa, good. Confirmed.
Yep. And then we get the best line. I'll be back for you, gun. I thought
it's very normal. Just talking to your gun. You love that gun.
Yeah. Sure. Why not?
We didn't talk about the part where her gun runs out of battery and she's just like, can anyone throw this at him?
Yeah.
I loved that. I love that part so much.
Yeah, me too. So Victoria flies down into the crack, notices that Rain is on the other side of the crystal. Scotty is still attacking even inside the crystal, even in the crystal dimension. She's capable of teleporting into there, I guess. So as the chapter ends, the people are all confronted with images of capes and apparently some of the humans present at their worst moments.
Yeah, and let's talk about this for a long time, because I think this is really, really important, right? Because what we see here, I copy-pasted it, and I don't want to read it all, but images of me wearing a Glory Girl costume, hurting a man in worker's clothes, smacking him into a wall hard. Images of a young adolescent Rain hurling a Molotov at an old house. An image of me punting a dumpster into a man. An image of Rain spitting into a scared girl's face before adjusting his mask. And we see that, like, everyone, it's other people are seeing images as well, but everyone is seeing these things and being affected by these things. And I think this is really, really important, because this is people seeing all sides of capes, including some of the ugliest side. I mean, like, in this moment, we're only seeing the uglier sides of them. But there is a possibility, as we saw the last time our heroes went into the dream room, you saw them at their worst as well. You saw like them at their lowest. You saw them suffering the most, like what they had to go through, what drove them to become capes in the first place. And so there's two reads of this, right? There's a read that like humanity is going to now look at these people and see how terrible they are. We have Rain here. We have Victoria here. These are two people that have done bad things in the past, and now those things are being exposed to all these people who volunteered to die because of the words of that person.
I love the idea that you've kind of picked out of this chapter of the bright's brighter and the dark's darker.
Yeah.
And that's what their little costume dealie does, right? Like it makes it look like there's a light shining on her. We're getting this idea that like she looks she looks even more awesome than usual as she's bathed in ethereal light that isn't actually there, carrying this gun and defending them. And then they're seeing her at her worst at the same time. And it's basically just taking the extremes and juxtaposing them. And I wonder what we're doing with that. I want to like stretch and try to make some connection to the word infrared. I can't really. Infrared is light beyond the human capability to perceive in the red direction, which means it manifests as heat. I don't know what else to say about it at this point. It's you could say it's heat with no light.
Yeah.
I don't know how to connect that to this thing though.
Yeah, I think it might be a little too early in the arc to start making those connections, but I think that's something absolutely to be aware of there. And I agree with you. I mean, the optimist in me wants to see this as a moment of mutual understanding, right? Like, especially since there are going to be some humans here who are going through the same thing, right? Like it says here, a bystander who looked shocked by the image's appearance was depicted in his own blurry scene kicking a dog that didn't move out of his way fast enough. And so this is a guy who Victoria called a hero a chapter ago, 2 chapters ago, who has volunteered to come try to help save the world, who potentially will die, and he kicked a dog. That's awful.
Yeah.
And it's almost as if this can be this moment of, look, the one thing we all have in common is we've done some shitty stuff in our lives, but we've also done some great stuff. Look, we're here right now doing it. And so the optimist in me wants to read this as a moment of connection, of understanding, of mutual understanding between these two sides in this fight. The pessimist in me says, oh, look how terrible the capes are.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it has a lot to do with what Wildbow's been doing throughout this story of having there be people who are trying to do good but have done terrible things. And this idea of like, is the idea of redemption coherent, or are people just complicated, or some other thing, or something between those things? I don't know. But it's definitely, I would say, a major theme of the story, actually.
Yeah, and I think we end this chapter on this thing that basically declares this is what we're going to be dealing with, maybe for the next chapter, the next couple chapters. I don't know. But this idea of, let's look at these people and let's exist in a place where we see each other at our absolute worst.
Yeah.
And there's no hiding it. Like they're all down here. They're all down in the trenches of the shard world, and there's no hiding your past from anyone anymore because it's all there on display in front of you.
Yeah. So I think to wrap up, I want to talk for just a second about what an unusual first chapter of an arc this is. We mentioned it earlier a little bit, but it's not that we never just continue on with the action in an arc opener, but it is very unusual. And I think in this case, it's simply because this is the final rush to the end. Things are too intense for really any amount of sitting back and setting the table and talking. Yeah,
I think you're right. I think, I don't want to speculate on how close to the end of the book proper we are, but this is definitely an escalation of pace. Things are moving fast. We're not doing our typical rising
Recover,
action moment, and you're right. This is not the only time this has happened in either of these books, but it normally does happen in these big, huge battles. Like in some of the bigger, larger fights, we usually have an arc that begins right after the end of the other one, because we're still kind of in the thick of things.
Yeah.
And this is like in the thickest of things. So I do agree that this is kind of drawing a line towards climax. And it's exciting because I like what's happening. I really like what's happening.
Me too. All right. Let's get on to the discussion question. The question from last week was, what is Ward about? 01ZG says fashion, obviously.
Obviously. I don't know. I mean, yes, definitely. Right?
Yes, but like that concept explored in a million directions in every possible dimension.
Yeah, sure. See, Zero thought that was just a joke answer and we weren't going to take it seriously, but we did.
We did.
Wanson says, for me, it's about recognizing your mistakes, owning up to them, and working your ass off to correct them. Clean up the fallout as far as possible and prepare to do better next time. Apologize to the people you wronged, but don't let it define you. You're more than the person who fucked up. Keep working on new, different stuff as well. Make new connections. Sometimes you can't get back to things how they were or how they should be. In that case, you need to recognize this too and settle for an imperfect solution instead of jeopardizing everything else by reaching for some impossible perfection.
Yeah,
I'd like that a whole lot. I think it's a lot of different ways of exploring that general idea of growth.
Yeah, I think it touches on the ideas of what it is to be human in this ambiguous and complicated world. And I love that answer quite a lot, actually. I'm already happy, and that's only the first answer. Sarah Penguin lists like 400 things, which is exactly what we told them not to do. Just kidding, Sarah. We love you. Let's zoom in on one of their answers, which was helpfulness. Ward seems to focus a lot on the desire to help and how helping others can help with recovery. Victoria regularly throws herself into danger out of a desire to help others. In the flashback, we see her at her worst. In chapter 1, she is not doing well, but much better than the flashback after helping with the patrol. She has had more strides in recovery as she helps break through. While Ashley helps Kinsey, it seems that Ashley benefits from that helping more than Kinsey does. Capricorn only starts getting better when they stop fighting and start helping each other. The reason Fumehood retained any humanity while going Titan is that she wanted to help the major malfunctions. Helping can backfire, though. Kinsey will help others at the point of not eating or sleeping. Sveta uses helping to avoid her own problems and tries to fix her relationship with food and sex instead of communication. The navigators got carved up after having their helpfulness used to lure them into a trap. Shortcut hates Victoria because she stole his chance to help. Wow, that's really interesting. I never really thought about it being that complicated and kind of woven throughout the story in that many ways.
Yeah, and what I like about that answer is what I like about this book is that, you know, the themes are never clear cut. Like I absolutely agree that one of the things that Wabo is talking about is helpfulness and community and how people help each other. But I love that the book is complicated enough where it doesn't just say this is objectively good, helping people. It always works out.
Yeah.
There are people that will take advantage of that. There are people that go too far with it. Everything, every behavior, every action can have a bad side to it as well. And the book is not gonna just like shove those under the carpet and pretend like those aren't there. It actually looks at them head on, and it's why the themes of the story I think are so fun to kind of pick apart and explore, because they very rarely offer you just a simple yes, this is what the book is saying, this is unquestionably the correct thing to do always.
And I think that's just realistic. Like in real life, sure, we never get the answer of like, and that was the moral of all that stuff that happened. It's right. Always just no one thing is the thing that you should be doing more of or less of. It's always a balance, and it's always complicated. And I love that manifests in the story.
And I still think that the book has a conceit and a conclusion to these things. Like I do think the book feels a certain way about some of these things, but it is willing to explore the areas in which those answers aren't quite as neat and tidy. Yeah,
or you could say that maybe Wildbow has in his mind some thesis about helpfulness, about the concept of helpfulness, but that thesis involves it being complex and ambiguous and not clear cut.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. All right, next up we have Killer Kino, who says, if I was writing a book report, identity and trauma are what I'd pick as the two central themes. Identity is covered in many scopes and applications, from generalized personal identity to identity within family, to identity within society. We even cover both contemporary identity issues and hypothetical identity-shattering events. Trauma is presented globally, socially, and of course personally. The gamut here is also run from real issues to fictional circumstances, and they used a bunch of examples. I wasn't going to go through and read them all, but they, for each and every one of those things, they pulled out examples in the book. And I like that. Identity and trauma. Absolutely. And I think like Worm was about trauma as well, but Ward is exploring it in a very different way, as I think some of our answers here are going to get into in really interesting ways.
I feel like, Ward may be more about trauma than Worm was in a certain sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
I don't know if I can substantiate that right here and right now, but I think that like so many of the interludes are just, here's the trauma, here's what this person's dealing with, and how they are continuing to reel from that trauma.
Yeah.
So
the funny thing is I was struggling to come up with a way of like verbalizing how you are exactly right, but as soon as you said that, I was like, yeah, totally. So I agree with you, but yeah, I think it's challenging to explain exactly how.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Dalai Jaya says, taking up the story 2 years after the end of the world, Ward immediately positions itself as being concerned with false stability as opposed to picking up the pieces. Almost from the start, we see people settled into a semblance of their pre-Gold Morning lives. There are cell phones, coffee shops, car wrecks, and cops and robbers. Yet it all feels off, like something isn't quite right. The shape is there, but it's hollow. Things are missing. Looking deeper into the narrative, we can see that everyone is in some form of denial. From the kids learning about 5 pounds of gun to Ashley proclaiming her intent to be a villain while still in therapy, there is an obvious disconnect with reality. Objectively speaking, Jessica and her sense of professional ethics really contribute to everything that happens. She values her oath above the potential dangers presented by Chris literally failing in her duty to warn. Reading between the lines, this hesitancy on her part jumps out as the entire world being gun-shy in the wake of Capri. This is really cool because this is not something I ever really noticed like consciously, but it happens again and again where like we see stuff like they're not really build like they overbuild in some areas, right?
Yeah.
And then it causes a problem later. Like there's all these manifestations of the idea that like everyone's trying so hard, you know, they're watching their morning news shows and everything, trying so hard to pretend everything is back to normal and paper over the disaster as fast as possible. But the fault lines that led to it happening are still there. And in fact, haven't even really been slowed down. So,
yeah, I mean, that like going even more broad, that's the book, right? This idea that like this terrible, awful thing happened, and the next day everyone just said, okay, let's get back to normal, but we haven't solved the underlying problem. And that's what's happening now is those little cracks that we tried to pave over are collapsing. And that is exactly what the state of the world is right now.
I remember when this book started, I've stared at that first sentence about them having a chance to start over and coloring it gold of all things, and being like, I know this is going to turn out in retrospect to be the key of the whole book, but I just can't understand how. And I think this is kind of part of what that is this idea that everyone was so eager to start over that they started over with an unsound foundation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they didn't solve any of the problems.
Yeah.
Like, going back to recovery, this is just another facet of that idea that like you didn't actually get better. You just wanted it to be normal again. And no one put in the steps necessary for that. They just wanted to get their coffee. They just wanted to go back to normal. And you can't go back to normal. You've all suffered this great, horrible thing.
Yeah.
Next up, we have Fridian, who says Ward is about fascism, how a well-meaning good person like Victoria can become an authoritarian and do awful things in the name of keeping the peace and doing what's best for society. See the Anti-Parahuman Society, Kenzie's mass surveillance, and the prison world for example of this. Ward is also about personhood. It asks us what makes someone a person and what makes two people different from one another. A massive number of storylines play into this: Swansong and Damsel, Chris and Labrat, different facets of people in the Crystal Realm, multiple people having the same physical experiences through being linked by Darlene. And then lastly, Ward is about rape culture and the importance of believing in victims. Victoria's experiences were disbelieved and downplayed, and her abuse continued to get worse and harm more people. I like that answer. I don't know how far Victoria's gone into the authoritarian tendencies. I mean, I definitely think that is a possible conclusion for her. I don't think she's quite there yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think that anytime you're in a life and death situation, the things that happen are going to look like that, and they may indeed be manifestations of authoritarian tendencies, but they may just be you trying to not die. And it's hard to distinguish in this particular case, but I still think it's interesting. Like, I think that there's always a potential for authoritarian themes when you're dealing with any kind of law enforcement, because the temptation for law enforcement will always be in the direction of harsher, give us more power so we can do a better job type reasoning.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Hero of Old Iron says, I'm going to take this from the angle of my best boy, Rain. The story is about guilt, responsibility, and growth. It's about looking into the mirror, realizing that the person looking back has done some truly terrible things and trying to find some way to live with it, with that reality. Now, maybe you had an excuse. All members of Breakthrough had an excuse. Rain certainly did in The Fallen. Maybe you felt like you were forced to do it, but what would have happened to him if he didn't obey Seer, for example? they basically go on to point out that like Rain's arc is this perfect exploration of these ideas of guilt, responsibility, and growth. There are other characters who touch upon it, I think, but I think his might be the cleanest. That they make a case that it is anyway. I think this is a good post. It's pretty long though. That's why I'm kind of summarizing it. But yeah, I think they finish saying Rain is Breakthrough's backbone, strong, versatile, reliable, and sometimes down but never out. He's as true and blue a hero as the rest of them, and only made more so by how much he had to fight through to get there. I love it.
I love it a lot, and I am now kicking myself because I was rereading the chapters a couple hours before we started, and as I was reading, I was like, make sure, Scott, you mention on the show about all what Rain is doing in the background of these chapters, and then I forgot to do that because like Rain is basically in these moments, like we open 18.10 with Rain meditating and prepping for this incredibly scary thing he's about to have to go through, and Victoria wishes him luck, and he's like, no, I'd rather you have the luck. And it's like he's just been there, and he's just doing the work, and that's just like what he's been doing this entire time. He's just been there doing the work, stepping up, handling it, and just constantly, and so much so that like you kind of like, I feel like I haven't been paying enough attention to him, and I don't think Victoria's been paying enough attention to him either, because like it's just consistent and reliable and there. But man, I love him. I love him so much.
Yeah, the idea that he's the backbone is great because he doesn't, even when he's struggling, he just deals with it, and then he asks if you're okay. You know, he's great.
Just the idea that like he's about to go back into the dream room. He has no idea what's going to happen. No idea if like presumably there's going to be another scary ass monster in there. They're going to have to find a way to get around it to get through to the computer again. And they're not sure what all that means. And yet I think you need the luck, Victoria. What you're doing out there is going to be more important. Man, what a guy.
Yeah.
Next up, we have Fetishist, who says, this might feel overly obvious, but Ward is about heroism and the toll it takes to try to live as a hero, the psychology required to make heroic choices, and the different meanings people ascribe to the idea of doing what's right. Sure, Worm was about that too, but I'd argue Ward is more concerned with it. It's absolutely about trauma recovery, community, personal development, and similar, but it's important that those themes are explored through the lens of people who want to be heroes, who are choosing that path. It's also about how one might tie oneself in knots, either trying to be one or trying to pretend you are one, and how one might surprise oneself by becoming one. I like that answer a lot. I think that is absolutely true, that there's a reason why we are talking about these themes from the perspective of someone who is kind of inherently heroic and wants to be such.
Yeah, I was really happy when this story started and we were going to be with Victoria, because I was just like, oh, okay, like it was fun exploring the gray morality of being a villain, and I'm really happy that we are doing this very different thing where Victoria is really not about the gray morality.
Yeah,
but that doesn't make her any less complicated.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Manukos says, as you said on the podcast, I think it is very clear that Ward is about Kenzie stealing a puppy. We did say that.
Good joke, but it is, because Kenzie stealing a puppy is symbolic of how difficult and hard recovery is, and how you can make mistakes and slip up and feel like you're not making any progress at all when you screw up, even though you knew it was wrong and did it anyway, because you just can't help yourself sometimes. It's hard. It's fucking hard.
Yeah, and then you cause everybody to be mad at each other and have to do like emergency. Yeah, love it.
Yeah. Mr. Cog says Ward is about asking what is the new normal, and about how characters survive and negotiate a variety of new paradigms for the world and their personal lives. The story's tagline is, after all, the rules have changed, and there are constant beats of a previous status quo being upended and a new one appearing. The story starts with the Golden City and a semblance of 21st century American life being restored. Is that the new normal? Is the city's imminent destruction and dispersal of the population into the countryside just how things are? Is it normal that the mayor is a formal supervillain, that heroes are exiling people to other dimensions because their existing prison broke? What about the Titans? And he goes on to talk about how the Heavens arc really drove that feeling home for them when with the whole Cradle March plotline, and Victoria and company were more or less in a Cape Western movie.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I like that a lot because it kind of ties into the earlier response from the person talking about how we're so interested in going back to this. And it goes back to this one idea of that they never even named the city, like, so it's this rush to return to the status quo, but with the caution of making anything permanent.
Yeah. It almost hints that they never really believed it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I agree. Like, I feel like every week I'm like, oh, I feel like I want to talk about the fact that they haven't named the city yet, and it just never really comes up.
Yeah.
Captain Rhino says, I'm sure there's been a discussion on what is recovery, which addressed this much more thoroughly, but I think Ward is not primarily about recovery because some things can never be recovered. They can only be reconstructed into something similar and different, continuity and discontinuity. Sometimes that is a net gain, sometimes it is a net loss. Victoria will never recover her old self completely. That Victoria Dallin is gone. She has been reconstructed into someone similar but different. There is a continuity and there is a discontinuity. And Terry's is a composite of all the parts of her past selves reconstructed into something, hopefully, greater. Sveta has been reconstructed entirely into someone new. The person she once was is lost. And even if she could go back, does anyone think that she would now? For her reconstruction has proven to be far better than recovery. The Bedites built the city in an attempt to recover what they had lost. Biter said in Worm's epilogue that fast food signaled a return to civilization. But all of that's gone now. The city is being handed over to the Titans and the cracks in reality. If concentrations of powers continue to be dangerous, then humanity will have to construct a new form of civilization. This is still up in the air, so I think the eventual fate of the city will be the proof or disproof of this thesis. Cool. I like that. I think that recovery is one of those things that is not clean cut. It's if you say the theme is recovery, what you really mean is the theme is exploring the idea of what recovery is.
Yeah, and how much of it is possible. And I love, like, reconstruction is such a perfect word because it really ties into as they mentioned, this exploration of building who you are from the facets of your demolished self. That's what Victoria did with all these bits and pieces of herself. That's what she's telling Sveta to do. That's kind of what the city as a whole did. And what I love in a lot of these answers, Matt, is they keep going back to the city. As you said, the city is what we started with at the beginning. The city is kind of like this overarching symbol of humanity, and what are they going to do, and how are they going to survive? This survival of the city is the survival of humanity.
Yeah, love it.
Next up, we have Megafire, who says Ward is about recovery is a little trite at this point because I think it's been said by everyone by now. True, but I think an important element of this that hasn't been touched on quite as much is facing your trauma, and I think this is the answer that's going to get us to what we were talking about before. Like, how do we talk about how Ward is more about trauma than Worm? I think this is the answer here to me. I've talked before about how Ward seems to be circling around the main issue, the main trauma experienced by everyone in this world. Gold Morning. Ward has taken a look at the big players in Worm, the ones we knew as major villains, but that Taylor saw as resources to add to her toolbox in her conflicts, or big names that stayed in the background, but has taken this look mostly from the perspective of their victims. The Fallen went from being a bit of flavor to two villains to a generally terrifying cult, seen from the perspective of one of the people in it. Heartbreaker was entirely in the background in Worm, seen only a little through the way he fucked up Alec and Cherish. But in Ward, we see him and the horrible ways he treats his children a lot more directly. The Slaughterhouse Nine were always taken seriously as a threat and always despicable villains, but we never quite got to see the perspective of someone truly at their mercy until we got Ashley's perspective. Cauldron and their crimes against humanity have been grappled with much more directly through the perspective of Sveta. Notably, Cauldron has not become less complicated as a result, in part because we also saw it from Contessa's perspective, whose role in Cauldron is also really complicated. And they go on to talk about Amy a little bit here, but I like this a lot. Like, this idea of it's not just about trauma; it's about, like, facing that trauma head on, and really, really looking into it and exploring that. And I agree that Taylor, like, by her very nature, like, I'm trying to come up with a way of saying this so it doesn't sound mean to Taylor, but, like, she was a lot less concerned with a lot of the other people's issues. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this may be a non sequitur from what you said, but I think it's striking that we never really got the scene of her trigger event. Like, 100 quadrillion words, and we never really got the scene of it actually happening to her. Maybe
we
just
got her recalling it,
just some recollection of it later. But like we never got a flashback to we got more of a, you know, we got it. We at least got like a bunch of rumination and a dream vision from Victoria. But the point is that Victoria, or rather Taylor, wasn't really one for dwelling on that event.
Sure,
I think she was actually unaware of the degree to which it continued to influence her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right.
Whereas this story is more about people so dominated by their trauma that they're unable to push it away the way she did.
Yeah.
And then we have answer from Lost Man 138, the past and how it defines the present in some ways. The story takes place in the aftermath of Gold Morning, and with humanity still reeling from Scion's rampage, trying to find its way back to normal, or at least something resembling normal. The members of Breakthrough all have rough pasts. They kind of list all those. We're familiar. Mm-hmm. However, as Sveta said about uncovering more of her past, she uncovered more demons. The state of the world that Victoria finds herself in is one due to the machinations of one organization, Cauldron, the leader of the fallen Cauldron Cape, teacher who was trying to take over the Shard Network, Cauldron Cape. The people who run the city are ex-Cauldron, and the person who escalated the situation that led the current apocalypse, founder of Cauldron. Post-morning humanity issues run long before Scion's rampage and deep, just like Breakthrough. It's a really interesting idea that like you can track a lot of this stuff back to Cauldron and more generally back to the past, back to things that happened before the current status quo.
Yeah, I mean, I keep going back to Victoria's very early line where she says, "I'm not about forgive and forget," right? Mm-hmm. Like there's this inherent conflict in the story between this idea of moving on from the past and forgiving and forgetting. And we've talked about already today the ways in which some people tried to move on so quickly that they didn't actually deal with it, but some people are refusing to stop looking at it. And I think that's an inherent conflict in a lot of our characters, and we're going to have to see a resolution of that in some way.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Finally, we have Farm Fresh Hornets who says, "I have to say I don't know what Ward is about anymore, but I'm okay with waiting until the end before I try to make another stab at it." They go on to say, "I don't think I've known what it's about since the teacher raid, especially with regards to Ashley's death. I thought it was about recovery, but unless the book's thesis on the subject is sometimes you recover, but all that time and energy were for nothing because you get yourself killed and then your best friend and adoptive daughter spiral in your absence, that's then going off that the text is as it exists now, I don't know that it's really necessarily a story about how people can recover from trauma and get back to being okay." This is... I think is a very understandable response to that, right? Because like this is kind of what happens when you try to figure out what a book is about before it has reached its conclusion, because there are moments where you're like, oh, really? But I do think that this is going somewhere. And I think I continue to think that Ashley's death is this really powerful moment in the story where, you know, she figuratively and literally ascends to this higher place in doing what she did. And I do not think the end like message of the story is like sometimes it's all for nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I agree with you. It is really interesting how it is totally true that if, for example, it wasn't, I think I might have said this a million years ago, like it wasn't obvious that Worm was going to be a tragedy until the end. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely not clear to me whether Ward is going to be, whether it's going to be a tragedy or something else.
Yeah.
And that will influence in a kind of a retroactive way what these themes actually were at root.
Yeah. I mean, everyone says it's about the journey, not the destination. And I agree with that. But the endings of books are pretty important.
Yeah.
The conceit of what the story is doing is fairly important to what the overall themes end up being. And I think the reason why you wanted to ask this question now, I think you said it when you did it, is because we're in this very unique situation right now where we have ideas about what it's about, but we don't know for sure until the book reaches its conclusion. And it's going to be fun to kind of go back and look at these ideas and then see how off or on base we were.
Yeah, because it's really hard to remember how you felt about a story before you finished it. After you now know what the end is.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's not going to be a discussion question for next week because next week is going to be another 3-chapter episode, and that's just a lot of stuff for us to talk about, and then cover the discussion questions.
Yeah.
But then we'll be back on track subsequent to next week. For now, that's all we've got for you on We've Got Ward. You are all part of this show, so feel free to provide us with advice, questions, or thoughts on this week's reading.
You can reach out to us via email at gotwormpod@gmail.com or at Twitter @gotwormpod. I'm going to do some live reads now that we've recorded this episode. I don't know when, though, because I'm not going to do all 3 of them on Sunday. That's too much. So I'll figure that out and let you know on Twitter. Follow gotwormpod on Twitter, so you'll know that. My personal Twitter is at ScottDaily85, and Matt's is at MoreDinamail. And I think both Matt and I's New Year's resolution is to not do Twitter.
Yeah, or just the internet in general.
Well, I just it's 2020. It's a brand new decade, and I got on Twitter and I saw more takes that I thought were bad, and I was like, oh, nothing's changed.
I'm definitely continuing my resolution from last year to just mercilessly mute and block anyone who displeases me the slightest amount, because that made me a lot happier over the last year.
That's smart.
If you're not already subscribed to We've Got Ward, we recommend you do so and never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, anywhere else you can listen to podcasts.
And as always, you can find this and all the other shows we do over at our website, doofmedia.com. That's where you can find information on our book club, which meets every month, including this Friday, to discuss Ursula K. Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness. So head on over to doofmedia.com, click on the book club, and you'll find out when that's going to be. Talk about that book.
Yep, that's right, Scott. And if any of our shows are your cup of tea and you want to support them, consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia. You'll be supporting us and also Media MD and Do the Right Thing. You can donate $1 a month or whatever other amount you wish. Supporting us on Patreon gives you access to a lot of cool bonuses at different tiers. And of course, also the ability to vote in our fan art and costume contest and the Do the Right Thing contest, Doof the Right Thing contest, excuse me. Also, really fun hangout sessions with the whole Doof crew, access to live streams of our recording sessions like this one that we are doing right now at this moment, and of course, the Discord chat.
Yeah, and we did a fun game of Jackbox for our Doof and Chill session last month. Those are always fun. So I think that's what level is that? That's the $5 level.
Something like that.
So we do fun stuff. We have a bunch of bonus content. We wrote a bunch of Christmas articles last month. There's a whole bunch of cool stuff. Just patreon.com/doofmedia.
Yeah.
We try to give you guys content for your money because we really appreciate you guys supporting us.
Yeah, and always, make sure you go over to Wildbow's Patreon at patreon.com/wildbow, because the cool stuff you get for donating to him is that he gets to live and write for us.
Donate to Wildbow or he will die. That's what you just said.
That's what I just said. Special thanks.
But seriously.
But seriously, though. Special thanks to new patrons this week: Badoofs, Scott A. and Luke H. At the $2 level, and Doof Troop member at the $10 level, Adam R.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. I mean, we were joking around, but it really means the world to us that you guys support us. All of it goes back. We're about to launch a new show, so we've been doing a lot of behind the scenes stuff on that, and that all costs money. And Matt's working on a cool thing that we can't talk about yet, but I'm just going to tease you with it because that's what I like to do. And all your money really helps us do this stuff and keep it going. And it's exciting. It's a new year.
It is.
And if you cannot afford to donate right now, that is absolutely okay. You can instead help us out by heading on over to Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, or if there's other ones that do those things, and leaving us a rating and a review. Of course, no reviews to read this week, but you guys just click that 5-star. Click it.
Yeah, we love it. It's food. We eat the stars. That's all we've got for you this week. We'll be back next week to cover the next 3 chapters in Arc 19, Infrared.
We eat the stars,
Infrared.
Matt? The stars.
I do. I don't know about you.
It's weird.